Barbara, you can sit anywhere you want, Barb. Okay. Okay, Barb. If you have to say something to somebody, you can come over here and do like, I'd like to have your testimony.
Okay.
If I forget. I'd like to go ahead with this hearing. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I chair House Education. I hail from Haverhill. For those that don't know where that is, that's up north a little bit to the northwest on the Connecticut River. I'd like to go through a couple of our ground rules here before we enter this hearing here today. Some of you may have been here before for other bills similar to this. One, I want to remind everybody that this hearing is being streamed right now, so it's being heard elsewhere just beyond these walls. So if you want to be heard when you're giving presentation, please speak into the mics. For those on the Education Committee here, when you speak, you have to press down the button while you are speaking. Got it? It's at the base of the mic there. In regard to decorum that we expect during a hearing, there'll be no clapping, cheering, or applause of any kind. If you hear something you like, that's great, but don't say it out loud, please. We do have a proper decorum, which we do follow here in the House. We also have a rule that there should be nobody standing. You should be seated in a seat. That is by way of the fire marshal. And we will be timing presentations, given the fact that on the phone this morning, my administrative assistant received 60-some-odd calls just in the office alone, all opposed, but that's both good and bad, depending upon your perspective, but from the administrative assistant's perspective, it really took us off task in the office of getting some of that information done, which we have to have our early bills out of the House by the end of this month. So we're under a time crunch. Lastly, we are going to be timing these presentations. Each person is allowed 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes. You will be given the signal with 1 minute left. I will cut you off at the end of 3 minutes. If we don't do that, we can expect to be here late this evening. If you have written testimony, we certainly would appreciate the clerk, Representative Shaw in front of me, will be asking, if I don't remind folks to please submit their written testimony to any member here on the committee, and then it can be passed back to her. That will certainly help. Now, in your testimony also, if the points you're trying to mention have already been mentioned once, twice, 3 times over, please do not go through that all over again. We've heard it. Just say, I support the testimony that's already been presented, and it reflects my thoughts. That will help us out in terms of trying to get everybody an opportunity to speak today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead. The maker of, are there any other suggestions from members of the committee? Looks good. I'd like to go ahead with the prime sponsor for this bill. The representative out of the North Country had to leave, unfortunately, today for an emergency issue occurring up in his family, and I understand it's not a very pleasant situation either. So Representative Burge will not be here to introduce. I'd like to ask that Representative Tucker, who's also a prime sponsor in that bill, come forward to introduce HB 1263.
Yes, I'm speaking on Representative Edith Tucker, COAS 5. I'm speaking on behalf of Chairman of our delegation chairman, Robert Taberge of Berlin, who is the prime sponsor of this bill. He became aware of the problem some months ago and has worked diligently to try to introduce accountability into the subject of homeschooling. I also have testimony. Should I give my testimony now, Mr.
If we have his testimony.
You weren't going to have me read that.
Pardon me?
You weren't going to have me read that. Or
no, do not read that.
Can I have my own testimony now?
Yes, you can present your testimony. You will also have the 3 minutes, though.
Great. I am a co-sponsor. I thought he would be here to introduce the bill and give the fundamentals. But I think that when I look around the room, I realize that when I'm here with 400 House members, we don't have such a very young audience. And this is the future of our state. And we want to make sure that future is as bright as possible and that nobody will be left out of the educational process of youth that's so important. And I found testimony in the New York Times about what reading does. The act of reading alters your brain. It does so first because your thoughts are brain processes. When you read, neural patterns come and go as the words pass before you. Some of those patterns also give rise to memories, subtle molecular changes in cells and the signaling mechanism that link them. And your brain is physically transformed by learning to read. The networks that underlie vision and language are changed. Even people who become literate in adulthood, as a team led by a French neurobiologist discovered, acquire differences that are visible in the brain scan. So it's important that we have children learning to read and learning the other fundamentals of education early in their career. It's too late often to catch up. And New Hampshire has a problem at the moment in having parents, some of whom don't send their children to school, but don't homeschool them in actual fact, the way parents who are here today do, who are caring about how they are educating their children. According to the New York Times this last Sunday, a front page article, in New Hampshire leads the country in deaths per capita from fentanyl. Almost 500 people died of overdoses last year. The government estimates that 10% of New Hampshire's residents, about 130,000 people, are addicted to drugs or alcohol. It's those parents who are unable to care for their children and get them to school every day. They're not homeschooling their children.
Representative Tucker, you've gone beyond your 3 minutes, so could you please conclude?
Certainly. So the parents who are here aren't those parents. This bill addresses how we can make sure that we find those children whose parents aren't teaching them at home and make it so that they are educated citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Hull, I'll also ask if anybody's come in with pink cards they'd like to speak. We need to have those up front here. I have roughly 30 to 40 of these cards up here, quick count. 99% of them are opposed to the bill, and so there's no need to repeat, as I mentioned. Representative Hull.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Hull, serving in two capacities, speaking today, one as a state rep and one as a father of four homeschooled children. First, thank you to all who showed up. We don't need the government to continue to look over our shoulders as we teach our children.
Thanks, Jim.
It is clear from those who showed up and from the scores academically that the homeschooled children are doing phenomenally well in this state. I say that having looked at my own children and other children in parts of the co-op that we belong to. Our children are succeeding academically. We're already paying for the taxes to educate the other students in the state. And now you want us to pay potentially additional costs because there's additional work to comply with this law both at the home level as well as at the state level. Some superintendent's going to have to review these materials that are being submitted to make sure they're compliant with the 40% requirement, yet there are school systems that aren't even hitting those same requirements. I would ask that you would find this bill ITL. Okay, there is no reason to proceed forward with a bill when the vast, vast majority of the families are already doing a great job. Thank you.
You have the capability to ask questions of any speaker that you care to if that speaker is willing to accept those questions. So we can do that. We will move forward. I'd like to call forward Kathy Baker, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Kathy Baker. I'm a homeschool parent in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I would like to say that I know no group of parents who are more committed to their children's education than homeschool parents. And I know a lot of parents that homeschool, a lot of parents that private school, and a lot of parents that send their children to public school. And those who are by far the most interested in their children's education are those who are homeschooling. And we do it for a variety of different reasons, and we have great results, as the former speaker spoke of. But one of the things that shocked me when I started reading about this was this bill that's coming before you was a quote that this was coming from the superintendent of schools in Berlin, and there was a comment about children missing out on free and reduced lunches. And a little bell went off in my head, and I said, wait a minute, the people that talk about that are people who talk about school budgets, because there's an enormous amount of both state and federal funding which is tied to free and reduced luncheons. So then I took a look at Berlin, at the superintendent of schools in Berlin who proposed this idea to begin with, and I looked at, first of all, the Berlin test scores, which are way below state levels. And then I looked at the funding for the city of Berlin's schools. 70%, almost 70% of their funding comes from state and federal aid that is tied to a per pupil number. And when I looked at how far below state test scores were, that explained to me why almost 10% of the children in her district, according to the numbers in the article, are homeschooling. And a light bulb went off for me, and I said, this superintendent isn't concerned that some homeschool student will fall through the cracks. This superintendent is concerned about every dollar she's losing in state and federal aid for children that are not sitting with their bottoms in her school's classrooms, which, like I said, are vastly underperforming the state averages. Yes? Oh, that's signing that I have 1 minute. So I question whether the problem we're really trying to solve here with this legislation is the problem that a homeschooler might fall through the cracks, or the problem that the superintendent in Berlin and other districts potentially are proposing is that we're losing money in aid for every student that doesn't have a bottom in a public school district seat. And then I see, well, who is it that is in this bill that is enabled to put on probation and suspend a homeschooler's homeschool program? It's the very superintendents that lose state and federal aid for every student that isn't sitting in their classroom. So even if, at the end of this, and I think all the other testimony you'll hear today will convince you that homeschoolers are being well taken care of, but even if we say, okay, we have to find some mechanism to make sure that students are getting educated that are homeschooled.
That's 3 minutes.
We can't leave that with the superintendents of schools who have a conflict of interest financially in getting those dollars, those bottoms and dollars into their seats. So this bill can't work. We need a whole different mechanism if we decide this is a problem that we need to solve. This bill solves a different problem.
Thank you. Questions on the committee? Not seeing any. Jacqueline Benson? Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify for you folks today. So, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, my name is Jacqueline Benson.
Excuse me. Yes. When people are testifying, if you have written testimony, I believe you do.
Yes.
Then it would help the clerk. She doesn't have to then try to record everything you're saying because it's within your testimony, and that will significantly help her.
Yes, I can give her a copy of the speech here, and the report that I have I actually gave to the secretaries when I checked in. So there should be a copy of that actually for each committee member and for the record.
Thank you.
So I am here today on behalf of Citizens Count New Hampshire, and we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is devoted to making it easier for citizens to interact with elected officials. As an organization, we do not take a position ourselves on these issues, but what we do is inform citizens about bills that are being debated here at the State House, and we invite them to share their views through social media and on our website. So on November 29th, we posed a question about this bill. We asked our community, should parents of homeschooled children be required to submit academic performance evaluations to a school official, either the Commissioner of Education, a local superintendent, or a private school principal? And we were able to isolate the responses that were from New Hampshire. And the report that each of you should have a copy of shows you the results of just the New Hampshire folks that participated in this discussion. And I want to emphasize that this isn't a poll. This is a form of citizen testimony for folks who weren't able to make it here today. So a total of 201 people participated in this discussion, and 144 of those were opposed to the bill, with 35 in favor. And the packet that each of you should have access to a copy of has a complete record of that discussion, so you're able to read all of those comments if you would like. And I'm happy to take any questions about the comments or about our program here if any members of the committee have any.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Not seeing any.
Thank you
very much. I'd like to call forward Abigail Bellamore. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Abigail Belmore from Chester, New Hampshire. I'm also in hand here of the petition that has been going around the state for the last 2.5 weeks. I have a copy, solid copy, and 20 copies for each member of the statement of what I'm going to read. So I have 2 things, one for the petition and one for my own. Good afternoon. I'm going to present with you this petition. It's got 1,397 signatures and counting. The petition is a rejection of the homeschooling bill. It pertains to additional third-party oversight for the New Hampshire homeschoolers. We, as homeschoolers, take pride in our child's education, securing the knowledge that they are receiving the best possible education. It is tailored to their own unique needs. It also stands that we're required by law to evaluate our children annually. This criteria is being met using several methods. We have to do a written evaluation, or we can do a standardized test, or agreed upon assessment with whatever standard we use. The results are kept by the parent. We don't have to turn them in, but if you ask for them, we might return them in. We have an introduction for, effectively striking out those uses of evaluation to create a hostile environment for homeschooling families. We do not get access to public schools because you guys crossed it out. We lose our build a relationship when we do our evaluations with our evaluator. You terminate the program if we are not meeting your 40% or your age appropriate to needs. If we weren't meeting your needs, you guys are going to send our information. You're going to determine whether or not we're meeting your needs. You're going to give us probation. You're going to turn around and say, we've got 1 year to get better. As we said, each child grows at their own rate. Then we'd have to be reviewed, determine that we need to be forced into public school, put under supervision, and attendance would be compulsionary. It's not right. These are not conditions that any other public or private school are held to. If the child in school is not learning at so-called level age appropriateness, you guys aren't put on probation. Their programs aren't terminated. Children are still behind. This is a gross overstep of government reach and privacy. There is no such thing as one-size-fits-all education. This bill seeks to remove parental rights for choosing our children's schooling or forcing the children back into the school system. This is simply so that the districts aren't losing funding, and each family that chooses to homeschool, you lose money. The decision is often most not made due to huge failure in the public school system. As you see in this petition, there's a lot of received support in a short amount of time. The Berlin superintendent was so concerned with student progress, he should have focused his attention on the failing students. That's on the petition.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Shaw?
You said on your card that you support the bill. I didn't think so. Okay. So I have your permission to change it. Okay.
Okay, moving forward here, I'm going to call an individual forward, then also name another name, so that person will be on deck and we'll be able to move through a little quicker. Yes, Representative Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I am a great supporter of homeschool. I think it does a wonderful job. One of the problems that I find as a former school board member and chairman is once a child has opted out to go homeschooled, we don't know what happens. We cannot tell you in the Kearsarge School District how many students are homeschooled or not homeschooled, or whether, let's just take whether they're homeschooled or not. So we
Can everybody hear him? No, I think we're going to have to...
Okay, I'll try it there.
There we go.
Sorry. We don't know how many students in our school district are homeschooled or not after they sign out once. That presents a problem to knowing whether they're getting educated, as you people are doing, or what about those that aren't?
Well, don't we have to sign a yearly, well, the one time when they turn 6, that we have to send in a paperwork stating that we're going to homeschool. We get a certificate or some type of email or some type of letter back. I know I did. I used my current school system. I sent in a letter to my supervisor. 3 weeks later, I finally get a letter back saying that they acknowledge that I'm homeschooling. That should tell you how many people are homeschooling. Then if we decide to move districts or if we move out of state, we have to terminate with a letter stating to whatever facility or agency we used that we are leaving. That's what we're supposed to do. This is what I've learned from everybody else at homeschool. I'm getting nods on the room here. That should tell you whether or not we're leaving that district or terminating our homeschool program. We're either sending them to a charter school, a private school, or another public school, or their school is done. You guys should have notification whether or not we're doing homeschooling, whether or not we terminate.
I will check into it, but my understanding is once you sign up for homeschooling, that is your only contact with the school district.
We're allowed to use our taxpayer money, because we already pay, whether we use our public school or not. We should be able to go and use the library, history class, a science class, band, art, all that. We should be able to go in and be using those if we feel that as teachers, parents, that we can't provide that education that is proper. We choose to send them to a specific class or a specific activity. That's what we're supposed to be able to do. I know my school does, even though they're hostile.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to call forward Representative Itza and have Representative Horner on deck.
I believe I actually checked the wrong box on my pink card. I rise in opposition to this bill. I do not support expanding the state's role in home education. It's rather an oxymoron. But I'd like to go back to first principles. Article 1, Part 1, Article 1 of our state constitution identifies the state of New Hampshire as a Lockean social contract. If you read Locke, and I have, it is the parents and not the state who has the duty to educate children. It is parents who have the first responsibility. Our provision of public education is a stopgap, if you will, for those who choose not to or do not or are unable to educate their own children. But it is not a presumption of state control. The presumption is of parental control, according to our form of government. Now, I home educated our children, 4 of them, all the way through high school. 2 of them attended college. None of them had to take remedial education as part of their college. I've also spoken in my local public school regarding the Constitution, which may surprise you, but be that as it may, I had the students read aloud. This is 8th grade level. I was positively shocked by the number of students who could not pronounce or comprehend a 3-syllable word that they had not seen before. They couldn't define it from context. If you look at our own state standardized testing, 49% of those in 11th grade are not performing at grade level with competency in math. The results are similar for English, for language, though I don't have them specifically. When publicly educated students go to our local colleges, our state colleges, about 40% of them have to take remedial classes. If you want to look at where there's educational neglect, look at what we do as the state. That's where we're really falling down. No child should be passed to the next grade who isn't competent at the grade they're in. That's a malfeasance, in my opinion. It is not homeschool students who need closer oversight. It's the public schools. Look at how much we pay for them. Right now, if you want to home educate, you notify your local educational subdivision. You tell them you're going to take responsibility for that task. Thank you.
Representative Itzel, you're at 3 minutes.
Okay. Again, I do not support the bill. It is an overreach of government. We fought very long and hard to get it to this point, and I urge you to vote inexpedient to legislate, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Would it then be okay for us to change our pink slip
Please
from
do.
support to
You have my
oppose?
You have my
All right.
permission and request.
It's done. Are there questions for the representative? Representative Moffett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for being here, and thank everybody else who took the time to be here. This goes to you, Representative, but it also goes to any or all subsequent speakers. Some of us were not in the legislature, including myself, when the current statute was passed in 2012. But some of us would be interested if anybody could give us some specific examples or identify the problems prior to 2012 that prompted HB 1571 in 2012. I think that would help some of us to understand why the law changed, what was going wrong before that prompted the current law that is now being sought to be replaced.
I never had a particular problem with this, but you had schools spuriously intervening in home educators choosing how they were going to educate, choosing their curriculum, as long as it met the state standards, it was fine. They were basically second guessing, and in some cases harassing homeschool parents. And if you think about the motivation for the movement, I mean, ours was really educational because we just saw that the school wasn't doing a good job, and so we chose to do it ourselves. And we had social issues as well. But people who are home educating are doing it because they don't want to be involved with the government. And for the government to say, but you have to anyway, that's a problem, especially when our form of government puts the first onus on parents, not on the state. And the state can't look and say, look what a great job we're doing.
Thank you very much, Representative. There are a number of us who were on the committee at that time who wrote the current bill, so we can discuss that further when we get in an executive session. I'd like to call forward Representative Werner Horn and have Michelle Lavelle waiting on deck.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Education Committee. I really only have two subjects that I'd like to mention today. First is, I was homeschooled. My parents didn't like the treatment I was getting at the hands of our school district, so in New Jersey, the most liberal of those bastions on the East Coast, they took me out. I spent 2 years being homeschooled. And I was very, very aware, almost every day, that my parents considered it their responsibility to ensure that if at some point I was going to re-enter the public school district, I would not have lost any time grade-wise. They understood it was their responsibility to make sure that if I had to go to 9th grade or 10th grade or 11th grade, that I would pass the criteria the school district would impose and allow me to be into those school districts. And by and large, homeschooled parents who make the decision to homeschool for whatever reason take that very seriously, because it's not like I'm going to homeschool my kid on Monday but then send them back to public school on Tuesday. When those parents make that decision, they understand their child is now their responsibility, and that's not something that they can just turn off if they don't feel like it. So I would urge the committee to consider the character that those parents show by making that brave decision. And the second topic I wish to discourse upon is a more practical aspect. I stood up last year and I asked for $6 million to forestall the district stabilization cuts that were coming. And I was told it's not in the budget. New Hampshire's $11 billion budget, we couldn't put $6 million aside to stop stabilization cuts from going through. Multiple senior legislators told me this. Now, if I am to believe that, if I am to believe that New Hampshire is truly not in a position to devote as little as $6 million, am I now being asked to believe to add to the levels of bureaucracy that would be required to assess, that would be required to administer the need for a hearing, or to provide for appeals? That we have the dollars to do that, but we don't have the dollars to send to our school districts who are struggling with adequacy levels that are quite frankly inadequate. And the House has already acknowledged how inadequate they are by the formation of a subcommittee to address education adequacy and funding. If everything was going fine and sunny and dandy, we wouldn't need that subcommittee. It's not. So now I am urging you to consider the monetary implications of introducing such a burden to the bureaucracy in this state, never mind asking teachers who are already overworked and underpaid to assume yet another responsibility, and that is to evaluate what a parent's doing in their home. We ask our teachers to teach our children in this public school district. They are no more appropriate to evaluate what a parent is doing in their home than they are to go into a private school or a charter school and evaluate them. This is horrible legislation, and I don't mind saying so. And with that, I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? No, we don't do any applause in here. No. One question from Representative Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. Just for information purposes, you said that your parents knew you were at grade level. Did they know that because they had to report any information to an educational authority in New Jersey, or did they not report to any educational entity in New Jersey?
My parents had to file, I believe, annually with the district their educational plan. It became somewhat easier for them because in the second year of being homeschooled, when my brother joined me, we used a company out of Baltimore, Maryland called Calvert. They had a curriculum in place that was available to be sent directly to the school board, so they didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions, thank you very much. I'd like to call Michelle Lavelle, and on deck, Sarah, I think it's SAU or SAW-ER from Nelson, New Hampshire. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. I do have prepared testimony. I have copies that I've already submitted, and I'll be emailing the committee a copy as well. My name is Michelle Lavelle, and I'm the Director of School Choice for New Hampshire, an all-volunteer coalition of concerned citizens, families, and leaders that advocates for educational options in the Granite State. I submit this testimony in very strong opposition to HB 1263 that would roll back homeschool year-end assessment reporting requirements. I'm going to start by telling you about one of my 3 children. When they were younger, we homeschooled them for part of their elementary education years. My daughter was a bright student, loved to read and tell stories, but struggled with her spelling and writing. No matter what program we tried or assistance we utilized, including working with professional learning centers, we never made progress. Back then, we had to submit our annual assessment results to our participating agency. Year after year, her spelling scores were in the single digits, even though her composite score was in the 90+ percentile. It wasn't until midway through 5th grade that we finally got a diagnosis. She has profound dyslexia, dysgraphia, and executive function challenges. We were told by Boston Children's Hospital to not expect much for her future, to set her goals lower. Yes, she satisfied the testing requirements to meet or exceed the 40th percentile on her composite scores. However, Reporting her results had nothing to do with providing her with the support she needed to go on to future academic and personal success. Today, my daughter is an engineering student at Purdue University. She has served on the university's Engineers Without Borders team as their chief grant writer and treasurer. And yes, I'm extremely proud of her. Sorry, I get emotional when I talk about my kids. This committee knows me so well, they've probably never seen me get this emotional. Oh, goodness. I tell you this because children and their academic outcomes are more than test scores. Any score, even 2 years in a row, cannot adequately determine if a child is making progress. It also should not be used to evaluate the overall success or failure of a program. Families use more than assessments to determine if an educational environment is right for their children. They consider many factors, including the school's reputation, course offerings, teacher skills, school discipline, safety, inclusion of moral values or religious traditions, class size, teacher-parent relationships, college acceptance rates, extracurricular opportunities, and more. Schools are held directly accountable to families, have to take all of these factors into account. Homeschooling is the ultimate in accountability to families.
We're beyond 3 minutes.
My apologies. HB 1263 is the complete antithesis of this concept because it makes families accountable to the state and to school districts. I have more about Berlin's test scores and how they are well below those standards that would be applied to homeschoolers. I will submit this testimony to the committee for your review, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for testifying. Questions? Representative Wolf?
Thank you for taking my question. You should be proud of your daughter. I'm proud of your daughter, and I don't even know her. That was great, and thank you for sharing. I'm asking you this question as the head of your school choice group. The one driver I think possibly for this bill and concern is I am concerned about the kids that are truly neglected, not about all the people that passionately care about and are doing the right thing for their children. But what about those? What is the safety net for those kids? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. In fact, there's a bill going around next week, Tuesday, that Child and Family Law is addressing, that addresses those very issues. It's next week, Tuesday the 30th at 2 o'clock. It's HB 1650. That resolves that issue. Right now, educational neglect is handled by DCYF through investigations, and frankly, they're poorly prepared to do that. They don't have the training, the expertise. Right now, other educational neglect concerns are handled through common truancy issues, or there's a process. That process exists. All students aged 6 to 18 are subject to New Hampshire's truancy and compulsory ed requirements. Those safety nets are in place, and even with existing statutes, under consultation with HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, it's our understanding that those concerns would already be able to be addressed through those mechanisms in place through truancy and local school districts.
Thank you. Further questions? Not seeing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah? And then we have Melissa Thurbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Shaver. I'm a New Hampshire resident and a homeschool graduate. Today I'll be sharing testimony on behalf of Cornerstone Action as well as some of my personal experiences. I support the testimony given thus far in opposition to the bill, and due to our time restrictions, I'll limit my comments to more of my personal experience I can speak to and leave the people coming after me to speak to the details of the bill. I have testimony going around that's written. So to give you some of my educational background, I was homeschooled from first grade all the way through high school. I have my bachelor's degree in business and entrepreneurship, which I earned from Thomas Edison University. I completed that degree in 3.5 years. I also work closely with many homeschool families across the state through a program called Teen Pact, which is a nonpartisan youth and government program for home-educated students, which has allowed me in my adult life to stay very well connected to the thriving homeschool community we have in our state. I myself had a solid, full, and enriched education because my parents decided to seek a better standard and better teaching methods for myself and for my siblings. Common Core and competency-based education have prompted many families to leave their public schools in search of better standards for their students. And for many of those students, homeschool curricula are yielding very strong educational results. It makes very little sense to punish the parents who have actively sought a different educational path for their children. And for the families who have already chosen home education, unnecessary and punitive regulation from the state will send an unmistakable message that you, as our legislators and as our state, feel that you know what is best for our children and have lack of confidence in our parents. Undoubtedly, our students will also understand this attitude coming from the state towards the family body. There were many, many times growing up that my education looked very different from those of my peers who attended public school. And there were many times when those differences would not have been accurately captured on a year-end review or on a standardized test. For example, when your civics class involves attending real hearings like many homeschool students are today, when you need to present a project to your peers instead to the public and to people of all walks of life instead of just your peers, when math class includes starting your own business and learning how to manage your money. These are skills and valuable, valuable lessons that will not show up and cannot be quantified on paper. In my adult life, I have never once, ever felt disadvantaged or deprived educationally for having been home educated. What I received is what many, many students and parents crave for, a personalized education that allowed me to successfully launch into life. The most valuable thing that being home educated taught me was how to learn and how I learn best. Now in my adult life, I'm able to confidently seek information and further education for myself without the requirement of a classroom or a teacher. And that is a skill that has served me better than any test score or standard ever could. In sharing this testimony, I'd like to be clear that I am not anti-public school. Transparency, quality standards and curriculum, authentic assessments, these are all things that our public school needs. And when those things are addressed, it will go a long way towards the exodus we're seeing from New Hampshire public schools. These are the things that this education committee and the New Hampshire Department of Education should be focusing their efforts on.
We are beyond 3 minutes.
Well, I am done with my paper. So thank you for letting me come and speak. I ask you to vote inexpedient to legislate, and I'm happy to take any other questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Yep.
Okay.
My name is Melissa Thaberge. I'm from Plastow, New Hampshire. I would like to speak in opposition to the bill. I have been homeschooling our 3 daughters in New Hampshire for 13 years. The nature of this legislation will put our currently peaceful cooperation with our local school district into jeopardy. It assumes the state, and therefore our local school superintendent, distrusts us. There are already laws and mechanisms in place to protect all children in New Hampshire from neglect. They already exist. This bill adds a layer of oversight only to schools based at home and assumes we are less capable of parenting and supervising the educational interests of our children than any other parents in New Hampshire. The vague wording in this bill is a specific threat to our family. The phrase age appropriate assumes that each child learns at specified and predictable rates that apparently the state has determined. There is no such thing as age appropriate when it comes to learning, as every parent and every public school teacher knows. I have one daughter who was working so far ahead of typical grade level that I had to invest in more advanced material for her to be challenged. Would you tell me that my choice for her was not age appropriate? And another child in my home excels in science and reading, but really struggles in math. If she works below a typical grade level in one or more subjects, will you tell me that her work is not age appropriate and at some point force her into public school? How is this just? Isn't measurable progress the goal regardless of specific age? As a former public school teacher myself, I was constantly reminded to meet the individual learning needs of each child in my classroom of 25 students. And now that I am teaching in my own home, how is it possibly wrong to have varied levels of performance? Individualized instruction is exactly what homeschooling is. Please don't undermine that with needless legislation. I urge you to consider the students you purport to help. This bill places unfair and unjust conditions on their success in education. Please remember that your assumption should always be that parents are working in the best interests of their children, that we are working in the best interests of our very own students. We really deserve far more respect and trust than this bill offers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you again. We'll have Don Merriman next and Michael Donnelly following that.
Hi, my name is Dawn Merriman. To the Honorable Committee, members of the House of Education Committee, thank you for hearing our testimony today. Everyone agrees that an educated society should be our goal, but some believe that it should be highly regulated, and others believe that it should be sculpted to the needs and talents of individuals. HB 1263 requires homeschoolers to meet standards that government-run, parochial, and private schools are not required to satisfy. Arbitrary standards are not being met, even by government-regulated schools, without similar penalty. As a resident of New Hampshire, I can attest to the fact that Raymond graduates less than 79% of its children. That statistic is appalling and has been even lower in the past. Children in every state institution are left behind, lost in the system, are exposed to pedophiles and predators, and urged to keep pace regardless of their individual capacity. Penalties for targeted groups based on arbitrary standards goes against every freedom that New Hampshire, the live free or die state, represents. In the last week, we have heard stories about abuses by coaches who had access to hundreds of young children for many years, all under the watchful eye of supported oversight. No one has called for stronger regulation in that sporting venue. We have seen elementary school gym teachers strip naked and chase young children around a schoolyard, yet there is no call to impose new regulations on that public school. In the city from which I am from, Baltimore, Maryland, this very week, they have indicted the former superintendent of Baltimore County Schools. That is the highest level position in a government-run school system. It is a system which is already highly regulated, yet it was not enough. Creativity can only flourish in an atmosphere which is comfortable to students. The continuous push of overcrowded schoolrooms can easily overwhelm any student, and especially those with special needs. In the push to produce higher annual achievements, individual needs often cannot be met and may lead to higher rates of failure for students who have minor challenges. The future we need for our state is one that will allow creativity to be fostered. The ability to tailor a student's education to their talents allows creativity to blossom regardless of their special needs. The freedom to homeschool independently and unhindered by gross oversight has and will continue to produce creative and confident individuals. We left Maryland because we were looking for a place that understood individual freedom. We were looking for a place where personal responsibility was respected, even though it is imperfect. It is a noble cause to champion an educated society and to fight for children who cannot fight for themselves. We must recognize that there will never be a regulation able enough to stop every evil we encounter in this world. While homeschooling is not perfect, it is certainly no more imperfect than any other institution and should not be regulated at higher standards than any other. Nearly all homeschool families who choose to homeschool do so to benefit their children. Our ability to do this is best for our children, to tailor an education to each of them that specifically, to encourage their creativity on an individual level, is a freedom that must remain unadulterated. The right choice today is to say no to HB 1263, oppose the bill, and in doing so, protect the legacy that New Hampshire has of ensuring individual God-given freedom that exists above the constructs of government. Thank you for your time.
I saw on your card that you had written down support. I assume you're opposed to the bill.
I am opposed to this bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for catching that.
Representative Shaw?
Yes, that was my first question. The second question is, probably for my committee as well as you, you said you have written testimony.
I did, yes. I handed it in. Should I have handed it to you?
No, it's not your responsibility. Whoever is receiving...
I think Ann Fitzgerald's receiving that information, and they went over.
Copy of them up here.
Yeah.
I handed in 25 copies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
For your information out here, all these cards right here, every one of them is opposed to the bill. So there's no need now to do a whole lot of duplication. Welcome, Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My assistants will be bringing forward the testimony that I have. Thank you, assistants. 2 of those are my children and 2 are somebody else's. Thank you. Each of those binders has about 727 pages in it. And I've got the executive summary that's being passed around here with a map. My name is Mike Donnelly. I'm a senior counsel and director of global outreach for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And I just want to say how inspired and proud I am of this community here in New Hampshire, which I was once part of. I grew up in Grafton, New Hampshire, graduated from Ascoma High School, public school. I didn't even know what homeschooling was until I had 3 kids. That was 25 years ago, almost 20 years ago. I have a JD from Boston University and LLM in comparative constitutional law and human rights law from the London School of Economics. I have published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals on homeschooling, human rights, education. I'm a national advocate. I go to many capitals all over the world in this country, and I just want to tell you that New Hampshire expects more from their state legislators than any other country or state on this globe. So you really need to appreciate the work that these people do, and they don't get paid very much either.
I don't want to have to remind you again, we will have no applause in Reps Hall.
Please, no applause. I have 3 points I want to make, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions. Number 1, home education is not a risk factor for abuse or neglect. Number 1. Number 2, I want to give you a national comparison to show you that New Hampshire's laws are actually somewhat more restrictive than most of the rest of the country, even with 1571. And finally, you have all the remedies that you need in the state to take care of the actual abuse and neglect situations that we all know, sadly, exist. So homeschooling is not a risk factor. There's been a lot of research on this, and I have reports in that binder, and there's a table of contents at the end of the testimony that will point you to it. And I've also sent each one of you an 8 megabyte file, so you have all that testimony in your inbox. Okay, so you can go look it up. The federal government studied this issue and spent 2 years looking at risk factors for abuse and neglect. The commission to end child abuse and neglect fatalities. They listed a number of factors that are known that are risk factors for abuse and neglect. Home education is not one of them. Educational situation is not one of them, frankly. I mean, you shouldn't be thinking about education situs and abuse and neglect. I'll let you read about it. Adding more regulation to homeschooling, requiring people to file a piece of paper is not going to address whether children are being abused or neglected.
3 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I think I've made all the points that I have. I just will point you to the map, if I could just give you the quick summary. 32 states do not require homeschooling families to make any contact with the authorities relating to assessment. 14 require annual assessments, but only 10 require that they be submitted to a public authority. So you've got the map there in front of you, the testimony. Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to serve you.
There's a question, Representative Myler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question and being here. Based on your experience, this piece of legislation was initiated to try to deal with those who fell between the cracks of those who are doing a great job at home. Based on your experience, what advice can you give this body that would deal with dealing with those extreme exceptions, and how this state can ensure that no student falls through the cracks at home? Obviously, our responsibility here as state legislators is to ensure that an adequate education is being given to every child in this, regardless of what venue they happen to get it in. I'm particularly concerned about those exceptions. What advice do you have to give to us about how we can deal with those exceptions? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. Of course, I'm very sensitive to the desire of this committee and everybody who's in state government to make sure that children are properly cared for and are not harmed. That is the appropriate providence of government. When there is harm occurring, it is appropriate for government to intervene, to take steps. However, I would take slight issue with what you said. I do not think it is your duty to ensure that every child has an adequate education in every form, home, private, or public. It is your duty to make sure that the public schools in this state are run efficiently and provide a good education. If parents decide that they want to not partake of that, not participate in that venue, it's their right. It's not your responsibility or duty. You should encourage them now to do that and not pass this legislation, because this would send the wrong message, as Sarah said before. I do appreciate the concern you have about wanting to make sure that children who are, quote unquote, falling through the cracks, they are cared for. So you do have legislation already in the state. I don't think you need to do anything. I don't think this body needs to do anything. I think what the authorities in the state need to do is understand the laws that they already have. And I don't think that many of them do. And so I don't know what you can do to encourage that. Pass a law that requires the superintendents to read the law, or truancy officers to read the law. I'm not joking, because the law requires that school districts appoint a truancy officer and have a truancy policy. I mean, do they not realize that they have some responsibility here? Like the superintendent in Berlin said, I mean, if she's saying, that was reported in the Manchester Union Leader, that 50% of the children who have left the school are being abused or neglected, first of all, she's a mandatory reporter. Why isn't she making a phone call to DCYF and accusing all of these families of abuse or neglect so that they can be investigated under the current law? Number one. Number two, why isn't she telling her truancy officer to go check up on these people? If she suspects that there are situations in homes that are very bad, and somebody, the Representative Tucker was talking before about the addiction problem, the fentanyl, the opioid crisis. I understand that. That's a real problem, and there are situations that probably need to be checked on. The truancy officer can go if she has reason to believe that there's a situation going on and the law's not being followed. She can go and knock on that door. He can go knock on that door and say, hey, what's going on here? Have you complied with the law relating to 193A? And the family has an obligation to maintain 2 years of records, file the notice of intent. And at least as a bare minimum, they could be easily produce that information, and that's all the truancy officer really would need to know at that point. But if there was a situation that was problematic, the truancy officer could go back to the school and say, you know, we got a problem here, we need to do something about it, and they could tell the family to give them more information. And after that, they would have met the requirement of 169D5. And if there was, you know, real serious problems, they could file a chins petition under 169D5. So you asked me, what can this body do? I don't think this body needs to do anything as it relates to the law, certainly not past 1263. If you can think of some way to, you know, tell people about these laws that I've quoted, well, fine, go ahead.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you, Representative Sullivan.
Question. Do I need this? Okay. Question. Thank you for showing me how to use the microphone. So if this bill were amended so that the public school districts had to apply by the same standards, is it true that the district that requested this would actually have to have their children removed and sent to another district to be educated?
So let me see if I understand the question. You're saying if you amended this bill to require that public schools achieve the 40% standard on standardized tests, or a teacher certify that the child is making age and ability appropriate progress, and if that didn't happen, would the school have to send their child to another school district? Well, you could certainly write the law to do that. I think that would cause a lot of upheaval in the state if you did. You know, I think the point that you're making is that it maybe is a double standard. And I don't think you can amend this law to make it palatable to the homeschool community. We oppose this law. We would encourage you to focus your attention on the communities that need your help, the public schools of this state. And I think there's probably a lot you could do if you focused on that. And I just want to thank you. Did I answer your question, Representative Sullivan?
I think you did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you.
Further questions? Thank you. I'd like to call forward Nikki Powers and then George. Which one are you looking for?
Hi. I don't have a written statement to hand anyone. I just have my own personal responses to a lot of the things that was being said. I have been homeschooling since my oldest, who's just turned 18, turned 4. He was ready to start reading, I think late 3s, and we just began. So I've gotten to know a lot of homeschoolers. Many of you are my friends. And we have a great community here in New Hampshire, and we support each other. And we help other families to pursue homeschooling when they have struggles, when they have questions. I've been on a steering committee for a homeschool support group. I am involved in classical conversations for the last 4 years. There's so many options. There's so many co-ops, and not everyone is a part of those, but most homeschoolers know other homeschoolers. And all parents, more than anyone else, want to see their child succeed. And so they reach out for the help that they need. And because they feel that burden to be the one to prepare their child to go out into the world and to be successful, because no one loves our children like a parent, they are going to ask the questions and seek advice. And we continue to adjust our path as we go, because our children are changing and growing, and as soon as you get used to them in one stage, they change, and so you have to adjust the curriculum, your parenting, all of that. And as someone who didn't graduate college, I'm about to send my first to college in Boston next year. So very humbled by that, because the children, you start out, you're actually home educating them, and then they're home educating themselves. And you are coaching them, and you're cheering them on. And, oops, sorry, a little nervous. I'm barely using my notes now. But that's our job, is to teach them the skills that it takes to learn, to communicate with those around them, to the world, and whoever it is that they're going to need to communicate with, so that they're adequate and that they can learn anything and follow their purpose, and to help them find their purpose. And who better to help a person find what path they should take than those who know them best. So I've had to learn to be a guidance counselor, and it's been the most challenging thing I've ever done, is to home educate. But it's the hardest thing, and if it gets tiring and you don't want to do it, I mean, I can't tell you how it would have been so much easier to put them in school. But I do this sacrificial work, we all do, because we want what's best for our kids, and we see that this is the best
That's
path
3 minutes.
for them. So that's it, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Question from Representative Heath.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm very impressed by the nature of your testimony and the conversation around the resources and the camaraderie that homeschool parents have. Is there a common place, or is this posted somewhere so that parents across the state who do choose to homeschool have that? My fear is that a lot of parents don't know about these resources and begin this journey with great difficulty. Can you respond?
Yeah,
please?
I have never. When I meet someone who is just starting out their journey, everyone's a little different, and depending on how much they want to reach out and engage and be in community with other people, it varies. I have a neighbor who homeschooled her son for just a few years, and she reached out to me. She was desperate for, and I think this is the thing, is most of us are desperate to have someone like help us get started. Like, what do I do? Where do I start? I just know this is the right thing. I've never met anyone who hasn't had that mentality in the beginning. And so while there may not be one large organization, it's a grassroots thing, and we have the internet, and we reach out and we find, and up crops, something to direct them which way we should go. I don't think there's any homeschooling parent out there who doesn't have the ability to find many resources. It's possible to homeschool without actually meeting up once a week with anyone or coming to support groups, because the internet provides a bit of a support group. It's not as good as being with others, in my opinion, but that's just where some people feel more comfortable.
Representative Burton, do you have a question?
Thank you for taking my question. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, we just heard from, recommends that homeschoolers, regardless of the requirements, legal requirements in the state, use some kind of standard testing for their own purposes. And I was curious, you probably wouldn't know what percentage of homeschoolers actually use standardized testing for their own purposes. In fact, California provides one. Do you use a standardizing test in your own
We
work?
do. We have a choice here in New Hampshire. We're still supposed to assess our children and just keep those records. So we do. And for years, when my kids were younger, I felt more comfortable going to a certified teacher with a big portfolio of what they had been doing. I always had to throw away a good amount because you can only keep so much. And that person would take a lot of time and care and look through those things and give feedback. I actually miss doing that because I would get so much encouragement from that. And we always, as parents, feel like we're not doing enough. And what this does is putting this together was actually a blessing for me because it showed me, wow, we did a lot this year. And the kids like looking back at it as a memory book. But then as they got older, it was actually more affordable having 4 kids to just do online testing. It was not nearly as comprehensive as the portfolio, but it tested in the basic subjects, and my kids were adequate, except one of my daughters in spelling is terrible. But she'll improve, and that's still at the 50th. She's like maybe 49, 50th percentile, but that's just, who she is right now. And she's doing really well in every other area. So I look at that and I say, okay, what can I do to bump her up? And so it's helpful.
Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you very much. And I would advise everybody out here to keep your portfolios. Show it to the kids when they're age 18 and mine when they're age 44. And you get a lot of good chuckles, and some of that artwork might be famous later on. So save it. Don't throw it away. I'd also like to, at this time, invite up here Dan McGuire. Dan is I don't know if Dan, are you awake back there? No, he's asleep. He was a representative here in the hall, and he has a pink card here. No, Dan's getting up. How you doing?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. But the good news is that Representative Horn completely stole my thunder. He did a very nice job doing it. So everything he said, I agree with. And I'll just put in one little thing, which is, if there's a problem with education, lack of paperwork certainly isn't it. So, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to invite, first of all, before I invite more up here, I'd like to thank all the children I see in here and students. Such a well-behaved group, a group that is hopefully reflective of all of our students in our state, because I think this is a wonderful example of our New Hampshire students right in front of me. I'd like now to invite up Candace Beckering, and then we have Jen Pereira on deck. Which one you want?
Who's the person that you're just inviting now?
The person was Beckering.
Becker, because I heard you say George before.
Okay, George, yes.
Okay, so
No.
so I'm up now, is that what you're saying?
You're
Okay.
George.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah, some people checked off support when they opposed. I apparently forgot to put my last name on there.
That's true.
Well, members of the committee, I'm representing Catholics United for Home Education. I've been at this for over 30 years. I'm hoping to start some grandchildren pretty soon. For me, this legislation would reintroduce the possibility of home education programs being terminated. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to some people because maybe not many programs would get terminated. But here's the thing. For 30 years, I've been talking to mothers who are they're nervous that they're not doing enough for their kids. They're afraid, what happens when the evaluation comes and one of my kids, because I know people who are homeschooling 6, 7, and 8 children, and most of them will be doing fine, but there's always one that maybe isn't doing so well. That's a huge burden on the mother, because it's usually the mothers. I mean, there are fathers who are taking a big hand in homeschooling, but mostly it's the mothers. Give me a 2-minute warning, please. Mostly it's the mothers, and if this legislation is reintroduced, it puts a big burden, not just on a few homeschoolers, but it puts a big burden on a lot of the mothers who are doing this. And I really think that what will happen, it's not going to solve the problem that Superintendent Cascadon is concerned with. I think she has legitimate concerns. I don't think she's making this up. I don't think there are as many kids in her district not being educated as she thinks. But be that as it may, this is not going to solve her problem. However, it will put a huge burden on many mothers. I know this because I've been talking to mothers for 30 years about what they're doing, and they're always afraid they're not doing enough. So please, let's not put this back. This possibility of terminating programs is a huge, huge issue for these mothers. And some mothers, all their kids are great, they're fine, they zoom through everything. But let's face it, not everyone. So I just would ask you not to pass this legislation. And quickly, I want to point out, I will submit...
You just hit the 3-minute mark.
That's 3 minutes?
Good timing.
Okay. I will submit written testimony. I just haven't got that all prepared yet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions?
Thank you. Okay, I don't have the pink cards. Is Ms. Beckering here? Yeah. The whole crew is here.
I'm sorry. I don't really think I need to say anything because I think George just said it for me. I homeschool. I have 7 children, and I homeschool 5 of them. Well, 6 of them actually, and the other's not school age yet. And I have a personal story, I guess, sort of like what George was saying, where one of my children maybe didn't test as well as the others. And I'm wondering how that would affect a family like ours. Does that disqualify me as a teacher? Or how would that affect me personally and our family with one child possibly testing below the 40th percentile, but yet he's skilled in many other areas? builds shelves. He can do a lot of other things, but maybe you wouldn't call him book smart. I just wondered how this bill would affect us.
I can tell you that the Commissioner right now of Education in the state is looking at changing some of the accountability standards that we have. For years, we've looked at our schools and looked at the schools in terms of academic achievement using a norm reference test or the statewide test of some kind. Now we're looking at mixing it between achievement as measured on an instrument like that and growth, and showing that growth is what we really want to see. You can have a student, as you're saying, below the 40th percentile or down in the 10th percentile. However, if you're showing growth, that's what we all hope you can see.
But I would like for the parents to be able to determine if they see the growth or not the state.
Right now, you do not turn that testing in on an annual basis. Exactly. You have that done by another person, certified teacher. Yes. So therefore, that person would work with you, and I'm sure that if you saw some issues, you as a parent wanting the best for your child would work to better that.
Exactly.
Are there questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Oh, is one down the end here? Representative Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. If you knew of available resources that would assist you in your task, would you want to participate in them?
Well, my husband and I are both involved in keeping track of our kids' education. And our son that has didn't test as well as the others. We've worked really hard with him, and he has improved. But so, I mean, we've been working with him on our own terms, I guess.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Thank you very much. Jen Pereira, and then Sarah, it looks like Z-U-E-C-H.
Hi, members of the Education Committee. I'm Jen Pereira. I'm a homeschooling mom from Manchester, New Hampshire. I also represent Catholics United for Home Education, and I'm one of their representatives to the Home Education Advisory Council in Concord. I'm talking in opposition to this bill. House Bill 1263 would require home educators to turn in their annual evaluations and to obtain a positive judgment on these evaluations in order to be allowed to continue home educating. There are some big concerns about student testing and evaluation. Some parents choose to use standardized testing as their evaluation method, and in that case, 40th percentile would be recognized as progress, whereas 20th percentile in the public schools does. That's not fair. A standardized testing situation may not be the best evaluation choice for a special needs student. Such testing does not always accurately reveal what a special needs student has learned. Some families choose not to use standardized tests because many of these tests are becoming aligned with Common Core standards, and they disagree with those standards as a benchmark for their child's progress. When the evaluation method chosen is a portfolio review, this bill, 1263, does not clearly link the review with the program created by the parent. It appears to leave to the discretion of the teacher reviewer and the participating agency the determination of whether the student has made progress commensurate with age and ability. If they decide that the child has not shown progress, the home education program may be placed on probation and later terminated if a hearing officer agrees with the decision. The parental right to choose how to educate one's child should not be held hostage to an arbitrary outside judgment call. I oppose this bill.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah?
My friend Sarah has asked me to read her testimony on her behalf. So this is in her words. My name is Sarah Zuick. I'm a New Hampshire homeschooling mother of 2, soon to be 3, young children. My husband Marcus and I based our decision to homeschool on our own early education experiences. As a young child, Marcus was a bit of a know-it-all, and for that, he was terrorized by his fellow classmates and even mistreated by a few of his teachers. He's overcome the effects of being bullied, but the memories of it are potent enough that he knows it's nothing he would want for his own children. My experience wasn't quite as traumatic. For me, the school day was a series of back and forth boredom and anxiety because I excelled early in some areas of study while falling behind in others. This remained true throughout my entire grade school and high school education. It bothered me enough that upon graduating college, I returned to get a teaching certificate. I wanted to understand what went wrong. I wanted to see education from a teacher's perspective. Through my studies, I realized that efforts are made to amend various difficulties with learning. They simply aren't effective for every child. As a mother, the differences in my children's learning methods are patently clear. My younger son, a kinesthetic tactile learner, succeeds through interaction, whereas my older son, who is more of an introvert, suffers without privacy. He learns in ways that cannot be supported in a group setting. He requires quiet, one-on-one lessons, then solitude for practicing his new skills before he is able to interact while applying them. The current nationwide trend of increasing homeschool freedom is driven by the empirical fact that homeschooling produces educational results exceeding those obtained by conventional schools. And the success of homeschooling derives precisely from the freedom it gives parents to experiment with educational techniques and to customize their homeschool program to the needs and strengths of each child. Decades of homeschool students outperforming conventional school students argues against making homeschool programs accountable to practitioners of the conventional model. Forcing homeschooling parents to satisfy the expectations of conventional school teachers will burden the homeschooling family's ability to pace the introduction of topics and skills in accordance with the individual child's needs and interests, to experiment with a wide array of educational activities which may or may not produce an audible artifact for review by regulators, and to seamlessly integrate educational activities with everyday life in a way that prioritizes immersion over documentation. I know of no credible source that would indicate the educational neglect is a widespread problem among homeschoolers. A rearguard action is currently being fought by political interest groups aligned with conventional schooling to resist any and all positive changes which are reinventing education. The same opponents of educational freedom who are aligned against homeschooling today came out to oppose school choice last month and will undoubtedly come out in opposition to future changes which threaten their preferred model of education. For the opponents of education freedom, every divergence from the expected is suspicious and dangerous. How then can homeschooling families trust the discretion conventional school professionals exercise in reviewing student portfolios will not be exercised in service of this larger regressive political agenda rather than for the good of the individual child. Each year, the conventional education system grows to consume even more resources per child with no demonstrated improvement in nationwide results.
Michelle, we're beyond 3 minutes.
Okay, it just says, please oppose the bill, essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have only the one copy. I'll leave it with the clerk in the back.
That's fine.
Thank you.
I'd like to have former State Rep Catherine Prudhomme O'Brien. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I homeschooled my own children for 15 years before becoming a state representative. And in the year 2000, the first year that I homeschooled my daughter, I did go to the public school in my town for testing because I wanted to see how my daughter was doing, and that was an option that was available to me. She was doing exceptionally well in every subject except for spelling. She was slightly below average, but she was high above average in every other subject. I received a letter soon after that telling me that the principal would be something like suspending my right to homeschool or something along those lines. And I wondered, how would she respond to a child exactly like my child if it was in a classroom in her school? I think a child like that would not be held back. They would just be asked to work on spelling a little bit more. I didn't go back after that. I decided to, with all of the available resources, there was a question from Representative Heath about available resources to homeschoolers. There are a lot of available resources to homeschoolers. I found that it was like drinking from a fire hydrant when you started to find out about some of these resources, there were so many of them, and literally I spent maybe 2 or 3 hours per week with other homeschoolers talking about those resources that were available, talking about curriculum, talking about the process. And I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. But I didn't find that it was, I did continue to do the testing, but in a different way with other homeschoolers, and when my daughter was in 5th grade, well, I'll back up a little bit. I pressured her a lot when it came to learning how to read, and that became a bit of a problem, and she had some phobia about that. So I backed off completely. For about 2 years, I didn't do a thing when it came to reading, except for visit the library a lot and ask her to take out whatever she wanted. And I just left it alone. When she was in 5th grade, she did some standardized testing, and it came back, and I thought that because there was no score under the reading section, reading comprehension section, that she might not have filled it out and that she didn't understand how to fill in bubbles. It came back PHS, that was the term. And when I found out what that meant, it was post-high school. She was beyond the high school reading level, and she was only in 5th grade. And the exact same thing happened to me today. I was joined by a friend of mine and her young son, and the book that he brought with him of his own choosing that he picked out at the library has to be about an 8th or a 9th grade reading level, and I was quite surprised because this child is only 8 years old, and I know how it happened. It's just that he's very interested. People are not telling him all day long what to be interested in and what to do, and when that happens, amazing things happen. Kids go off on their own, and they do very well in subjects that they're very, very interested in, and that's what happened with this young man today. And that's what happened with my own daughter, and I had to leave. I had to try to back her off from spending the whole day reading sometimes, because especially Shakespeare, when she was in 6th, 7th grade, she would spend the whole day reading Shakespeare, and I'd have to say, honey, we need to work on math a little bit because we do have testing coming up. So when it comes to resources that are available, that's definitely there, and I also wanted to make a real quick point about the situation in California. The family that's being the allegedly abusive family, well, it's pretty obvious. The kids, they were very maltreated. There are laws in California, and they weren't being followed. And if you put even more laws out there, if a family is not going to be following them at all, it's not really going to help. That was a situation about abuse. Not
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I enjoyed your analogy there to the fire hydrant. Rebecca LaBelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Most of my comments have already been addressed, so I will simply leave a copy of my testimony in the back. I would just like to read the very last sentence of it, which says that I will not homeschool my 3 children any differently if this bill were to pass, but the change of trajectory HB 1263 represents on the part of government involved with my husband's homeschool sets up an unnecessarily adversarial relationship between the two. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Thank you. I'd like to call forward Christina Knickerbocker, followed by Monica, Bacharya. Somebody can correct me on that when it comes to a turn.
Hi, I'm Christina Knickerbocker. I am from the Hooksett School District. I represent the Homeschool Coalition. I'm a representative for the Manchester area. I also homeschool my 4 children. So I have 4 girls. All of them are very different, and all of them have very different strengths. And so many things have been said today about the government interfering in our homeschool and how that is really detrimental. I want to address something very specific. I oppose this vehemently. My oldest daughter is amazing. She writes books, she tells stories, she can do games, she has a business of her own, she manages her money, it's amazing. She can't spell. She's also 3 years below on math. She has a hard time understanding math. If she were to do what this bill is saying, where she has to take a standardized test and she falls below that 40%, she is mandated to go back into a school district that she has already been in. She has been bullied in the school district. She has taken testing in the school district. She would be in a school district that does not have the funding to have support services for the current students that they have. Our K through 2 system in Hooksett has almost 600 children in it. That's kindergarten through 2nd grade. They have 2 support people for those who either exceed or don't meet current standards. Those children, let's just assume it's 10%, do not get to meet with those people more than once a week. So where is the support for those people? My youngest daughter is 7. She cannot read yet. She has a physical, visual difficulty that we have not yet been able to identify. She can read the word cat on one page, turn the page, cannot read the same word. When she takes a standardized test, she literally cannot read it. And it is through no fault of her education, nor her intellect, nor being left behind. We are currently paying through our dollars because the support is not there through the school system. We do not have equal access to special needs resources like you had asked earlier. Homeschoolers do not have that access. We have equal access to activities and classes as long as the school district has that grade level. So we do not have equal access to high school because Hooksett does not have a high school. So my 7-year-old, because she would not be able to fall into that 40%, would be put into a school district that is already overloaded, understaffed, with a school system that has already told me they will not work with her until she is in the 3rd grade anyway. So once she reaches her 3rd grade, which is now 3rd, 4th, and 5th in Hooksett, she does not have a support staff that can meet with her on a day-to-day basis, that can help her with the reading that she needs, because her challenges, which we are still trying to figure out, do not fall within the 13 federally funded guidelines of learning difficulties. So therefore, she is not going to be helped anyway. We have already talked with Hooksett about this, and they have already said this specifically. She won't be helped until 3rd grade, and even then, she won't be pulled out of class because she won't meet those 13 federally funded guidelines. So my question is, my child doesn't meet that 40%. Now she goes into a school district who also doesn't meet the 40%, who also doesn't have the support standards. Where does she not fall through the cracks? She is
We're
learning
at 3
at
minutes.
home.
3 minutes.
She's learning at home. She's doing things at home. She's progressing. She goes to school. She will not be learning. She will not be progressing. She'll be frustrated, and she will be in a situation that she is not supported for hours and hours upon a day. That is not in the best interest of any child anywhere. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Are there questions from the panel? Thank you. Monica, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You were close. Bhattacharya. Thank you for trying, though. So my name is Monica Bhattacharya. Thank you for letting me testify, and thank you to everyone else who already has. Many have already addressed the many, many strengths of homeschooling. Thank you, and I strongly agree. As a graduate of MIT, a veteran of the U.S. military, and one who has worked among the corporate Americans, I have sacrificed my 6-figure salary to educate my children at home. Right? Like you, I am obviously very concerned about education. We are not the only ones. However, education is not the only issue that I am concerned about. We have all heard the tragic stories of school shootings. Many of us are also aware of the anti-bullying classes and seminars that are held in the public schools and elsewhere, and the realities of the school environment that make such classes and seminars necessary. Other speakers have already noted that the homeschool education often exceeds public school standards, and that public school results often fail to achieve the standards set forth by the government. The school systems cannot guarantee a better academic result for the child than a failing parent. It's unfortunate, but it's true. I would argue that school systems also cannot guarantee a social or physical environment that is conducive to learning, socially supportive and nurturing, or even physically safe. I urge the representatives to consider not only the academic environment, but the total environment that a child may be forced into if removed from a home education program. Please oppose this bill.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the panel? Thank you very much. Before we go much farther, our clerk would like to speak for a second.
Yes, this will be quick. Is everybody
Thank you very much, Representative Shaw. Representative Shaw has been the clerk on the Education Committee all the years that I've on it, and for both parties, whether she's Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter to her, she is there doing the job, and we so appreciate her pearls of wisdom here as an elementary teacher and background, a grandparent, a parent, and it reflects, I think, all our positions right here, and mine too as a young boy growing up in Canada. All right, going on here with our presentations here, our speakers, I'd like to have Margaret Dry, followed by Beth Vitagliaro.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon. Thank you. I'm Margaret Dry from Plainfield. I am the homeschooling mother of 9 and have recently completed our 30th year of home education. I have written testimony that's been submitted with the people that give you the pink cards. Our family has been homeschooling since the mid-1980s, and my husband was a member of the Home Education Advisory Council from its inception and for the next 13 years. The bill that you have before you does not address any specific deficiencies in the current home education statutes or the rules, but it rather adds regulation without a clear purpose. One of the key lessons that we learned from my husband's participation in the Home Education Advisory Council is that placing burdens on homeschoolers is likely to lead to more difficulties, not fewer. The original and revised versions of RSA 193A and the accompanying rules in ED 325 or 315 were drafted and adapted to make the responsibilities of each party clear and to define the terms in such a way that all parties were speaking the same language. The legislature and the council, which helped the Commissioner of Education draft the rules, worked very hard to make sure that no one group had discretion on what constituted a home education program or what constituted educational progress. The very large number of successful students and the very small number of issues that have arisen over the past 30 years are testimony on how well the legislature, the Commissioner of Education, the various participating agencies, and the parents of home-educated students have been able to work together under the current framework. It's the responsibility of the legislature to find the least restrictive means to solve problems. If there is a problem with exceptions in Coos County, placing burdens on the entire state's homeschooling community is not the least restrictive means. Please vote this bill inexpedient to legislate. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Yes, Representative Moffett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question, and thank you for being here. And if I heard correctly, you said that you've homeschooled 9 children since the 1980s?
That's correct.
Okay, so given that experience, I do want to ask, I was thinking about this mom here who a few minutes ago was speaking about a reading issue with one of her children. And my question simply is, given your extensive experience, have you ever been involved with a hybrid type of approach where if you had one of your students/children who had a particular issue with reading or math, where you would avail yourself of any possible opportunities on the public side, a hybrid type approach?
I had a friend who said that that kind of living with a homeschooling family is the worst of both worlds, frankly, because it's very disrupting to have someone involved in one kind of schooling and some in the other. That being said, there are people who take advantage of opportunities from public schools for special education, for special needs, and for problems. Our family has been able to find enough resources in the homeschooling community, in professional community, and among our own experience to address problems like that.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 32 cards left from all the students out there at 3 minutes a card. Figure it out. All right, so I'd like to go on down and call Angel Brisson and then Sharon Phelps. Oh, did we get Beth?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Honestly, my predecessors have done wonders. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. They've touched upon most of the issues that we have as a homeschooling family. My child isn't even of school age yet, but we've been homeschooling her from a very young age because she's very bright and eager to learn, so we certainly weren't going to squash that. I also sent all of you written testimony previously, so you know some of my concerns and those messages that I sent you. So again, I won't reinvent the wheel, but I'll say that we have made sacrifices that don't really feel like sacrifices on a lot of levels to educate our child. It would be easier for us to put her in public school on some levels, but we're not comfortable with that. She's bright, she's gentle, and there are a lot of reasons why we don't put her there. Again, I detailed many of those, but safety and just the feeling that her education, her eagerness to learn, the breadth with which she wants to learn, the depth with which she wants to learn, will all be squashed in the public school system, to be honest with you. We fear for her safety, we fear for her spirit. She's progressing wonderfully. We're not afraid that she would be judged because of her lack of performance. To the contrary, we fear that she would be bored, used to tutor the students that aren't doing as well, which my mother-in-law, having worked in the school system, knows can happen. Again, many of my predecessors touched upon everything that we're concerned with. There's no problem here. There are other avenues to address the so-called concerns, and there is an underlying feeling that maybe we're just being targeted because schools are missing out on students. And I applaud what the chairman said, that instead people are starting to look at how they can improve the school systems instead, how they can look at better ways of testing and addressing the deficiencies that are driving us to homeschool our students to a certain extent. And that said, I oppose this vehemently, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Representative Shaw.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
I'm sorry, Angel Brisson.
Angel?
Brisson.
I got the card up here.
Brisson. Thank you.
What happened to Beth? There she is.
Okay, we'll let Beth go right now because Beth, got backed up there. Are there two Beths?
Beth Italiano, it's my husband's name, it's very Italian.
Correct.
I know, everyone tells me. I'm here to actually tell a personal story. I just started homeschooling about 3 years ago, so I'm a fairly new homeschooler. I kind of fell into it because my neighbor was doing it, and she said, hey, you should really try this, and my youngest son was actually having some issues, but the story I want to tell you is about my oldest son. At the time, he was 12, he was going into 7th grade. He actually was suffering abuse in the public school system from his peers, verbal abuse and physical abuse in the school system from his peers. Very little was being done about this problem. But that isn't the reason that I pulled him. I pulled him because since 4th grade, he was experiencing educational neglect in the public school system. He was testing below level every year for math. Every year I would go into his teachers and let them know that he needed remedial help. He was going to after-school programs. He was going to homework programs in the evenings. Nothing was helping. He continuously tested below level. He was continually pushed forward every single year. Every day was a new lesson. That's how it goes in public school. I'm sorry, you're not going so well. You're still going forward. So that was a problem for me. So I ended up pulling him in the 7th grade. I did my own standardized test at home, and he tested in a 4th grade math level. Let that sink in for a second. He was 12 years old. He was doing math for a 9-year-old. That really bothered me, especially since I'd been saying every single year, this child needs help. He would still test below a 40th percentile for his age bracket right now. But what I will tell you is in the last year that I've been homeschooling him, he's gone up 3 grade levels. I started him in the 4th grade level. At 12, I took him all the way back to 4th grade level, and he went up 3 levels. This year, we started in September, and he is only 20% away from being into an 8th grade level, which is where he's supposed to be. If he was tested last year, and he was tested now last year, according to this law, he would have been forced back into a public school system that was already failing him. I have a problem with that. I really do. And I'm sure that he's not the only child that's had this issue.
I'm so glad that I took him out. I know that he feels more confident. I feel more confident. And it's just such a reward seeing him not fearing doing his math work every day anymore. Because he knows that if he's not getting it, he gets to do it again the next day until he does. And when he finally gets it, the gleam in his eye, I did that without any help. I didn't have to look at my book that time. I didn't have to ask a question. It's so rewarding for me. And the idea that that feeling could be taken from me and he could be put back into a school that was already failing him, it's just unconscionable, personally. So I oppose this bill absolutely and completely. I don't think there needs to be any intervention on your part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much. Is Sharon Phelps?
My name is Sharon Phelps, and I've been homeschooling a long time in that I was homeschooled from kindergarten through 12th grade. I graduated from college, worked for AmeriCorps in a public school in Arkansas. I was a literacy intervention tutor for a third grade class, and there were 18 kids in the class, and 17 of them were failing in their reading. This was an inner city school, so you could say, well, maybe it was just the school, but I feel that that's probably not just the case in that particular school. After being in Arkansas, I lived in Romania for a couple of years as a community development worker there, and then moved to New Hampshire, where I finished a master's degree at Dartmouth College. And now I have 3 kids. I'm homeschooling my own kids. My oldest is 6. I have 2 stories. One being, the reason my parents chose to homeschool me is that I have a brother who is a year and a half older who was failing in our local public schools. He has a learning disability where he cannot test. He could tell you the right answer often. He couldn't tell you how he got the right answer, and he could not write down the right answer. My parents realized that when he was in 1st grade, that he was never going to do well in the schools because he would be failing in everything that he did. So they took him out of the public schools. My parents had great relationships with our local schools, such that when local schools knew that other people were planning to homeschool, they referred them to my parents so that they would have somebody to talk to have an idea of how to homeschool. My dad has since been a substitute teacher in our local schools. My brother now is an adult. He's successful. He's confident in his abilities. He is an incredible writer. He's been a paramedic. I mean, he works full time. He chose not to go to college and instead used the money that he had saved to put a down payment on a house. He has a family, and he's doing well. I know that if he had been in the public schools, he likely would have failed. And the first speaker spoke about the drug epidemic in our state. And the problem is that a lot of students who are failing in the public schools, those are the students who are most at risk to start using drugs or to end up in prison. I know that that could have been my brother. And I know that the way that the law is written here, this proposal, that he could have ended up back in the public schools. My parents aren't opposed to public schools. I'm not opposed to public schools. Now I have 3 kids. One of my children was born 3 months early, weighing less than 2 pounds. She's 5 now.
Thank you. That's 3 minutes.
Okay. And if she were in a public school, there's been a lot of scientific evidence recently that kids who are premature don't do well in those sorts of situations. I know that she could potentially be forced to be in a public school in this case. And I know that that's not in her best interest. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. And we do know there's many children out there that just do not test well in the format that we give. Look at Winston Churchill, being an ex. Tammy, as a K-I-D-N-E-Y? Tammy Kidney. Followed by Michelle Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I first would like to say I'm really grateful for the plethora of information and resources available to homeschoolers throughout the state, and for the community of homeschoolers in the state that no matter where I seem to travel, there are a lot of other people that I meet that are homeschoolers or know somebody that is homeschooled, and we all seem to draw together and get support for one another. Today, I'd just like to share a personal testimony. I'm the mother of 5, and we've chosen to homeschool our youngest child. She is now in 11th grade, and we started homeschooling halfway through 5th grade. We made the decision when she was in 4th. One reason we chose to homeschool was that our youngest child was falling through the cracks, and that seems to be an issue of concern with this committee here today. But she was falling through the cracks in a public school system. And although after rigorous testing, the school determined that she was not learning disabled, she was falling behind considerably, especially in reading and arithmetic. Her test scores were in the 20th percentile. She had an IEP, and the answer in all the meetings that we attended was that they would make the subject material easier for her. She had less course load. She did not have to reach the same achievement level as her peers. She would come home crying in 5th grade, Mom, everybody else in class has to learn 2 states a week, but I only have to learn 1. I made photocopies and let her learn 2 states a week. It was incredible, the decisions that were made for this child. Instead of accepting a substandard status quo for our child, we chose to homeschool. Our daughter has made incredible academic achievements since homeschooling, as can be testified by her state-certified evaluator. It is redundant to require another state official to review the reports of a state-certified evaluator or the scores from a state-approved test. This redundancy is an unnecessary burden to taxpayers as well as an unnecessary burden to the administrators that would be required to review this paperwork. Furthermore, it is counterintuitive and downright silly to suggest the system that fails so many children, allowing them to slip through the cracks, should have oversight on a culture that statistically and consistently exceeds the same system because of an unfounded fear of students educated at home are simply slipping through the cracks. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Not seeing it. Thank you very much. Michelle Kavanaugh, and then Merle Bodenick. Or Merrill? Go ahead.
Hello.
One thing I'd like to ask on behalf of the clerk here, when you speak, can you give your name first? Because between the cards and when I say the names, she's not quite sure whom is up.
Thank you for taking my testimony today. My name is Michelle Kavanaugh. I'm a homeschool mom of 19 years. So I've seen some changes in the regulations since I've started. When we started, we had to submit our curriculum each year and wait for a letter back approving our curriculum. I remember being in October going, boy, I hope my curriculum gets approved, because I started quite a few weeks ago. I noticed that the paperwork does kind of pile up, and even though the intent is to approve the curriculum in a manageable time, that didn't happen in any of my experiences, even though I submitted it at the beginning of June. So I think probably finding the resources to basically make it adequate to put in this HB 1263 would be daunting, given the number of homeschoolers. I am also an administrator at a homeschool co-op in the area, which we serve the homeschool community, teaching a variety of courses. We tutor kind of symbiotically, teaching each other's children and helping tutor them through any difficult subjects and things like that. I teach chemistry at this co-op and enjoy every minute of it. I have quite a few students in the audience. In 1998, like I said, the standards were different here in New Hampshire, and they've also changed since then. They were, for a while, we submitted just test scores. We didn't have to submit curriculum approvals. And now we're where we are now, where we have a lot more freedom involved in our homeschool thing. Let me tell you my personal testimony, because I don't want to repeat what already has been said, but there's some things I've heard, for instance, the safety net. I heard someone say safety net. I was sitting over there, I couldn't see who said, talked about the safety net that's there at the public school. I want to talk about that safety net and how it failed my family. My son, Josiah Kavanaugh, was struggling, and we knew something was up because he was really smart. 3 years old, he picked up reading just by asking silly questions at the grocery store. I figured out that he could read because he said, "What does that say, Mom?" And I said, "Deli." He said, "No, it says delicatessen." And I'm like, okay, wonderful. So you can read and you're 3. How did you do that? I want the magic formula for that. So he caught me off guard that day. Noticing later, though, he struggled with math. He struggled with some other areas. And testing, I kept seeing him fall behind. So I'd call the school district and I'd say, "Hey, I have these scores and I'm giving them to you," because I did have to submit them. "Is there some way I can maybe get some help for my son?" No, don't worry about it. It's not that bad. And so again, next year, gee, I'm seeing some more decline, and I'm not quite pinpointing the real issue that's going on here. Could you help me? No, we just don't have the time. We don't have the resources. I demanded an evaluation, and I had to really demand an evaluation. So I had to put quite a bit of pressure on them to do something.
You're at 3 minutes.
Okay. So they came back, did the evaluation after I force-fed them that evaluation, and they said, "He does need some help. He has bilateral movement disorder." And they said, "But we don't have resources." So unfortunately, even though you talk about safety net, it doesn't really exist. It's not there in the Manchester School District specifically. Thank you for hearing my testimony. I am against HB 1263.
Thank you for coming today. Okay, the next speaker, last name Bodeni. Little cursive training here. Palmer method, I guess. Do we have a M-A-V-L-E? No? Okay. No. Okay, let's go on then. How about Laura Bennett? Laura here? Then followed by Gretchen Post.
Hello, my name is
Good
Laura
afternoon.
Bennett. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My son is actually only 3 months old, so I'm not even here for him right now. He won't be ready for school for a really long time yet. But as a homeschool graduate, it's important to me, I'm going to start crying, to be here today to support homeschooling families in New Hampshire. I had to come in very suddenly because of my baby, and I might have to leave suddenly too, so if I am going to share something that you've already heard, I apologize in advance. Part of what I'm concerned about with this bill is the standardized testing, the oversight in general, but you can't standardize homeschooling. Part of the beauty of homeschooling, the essence of homeschooling, is that you have catered, individualized education for each child. You can't have a system for that. That doesn't work. In my own homeschool education, I come from a long line of musicians, dancers, artists, linguists, not a lot of people in math and science in my family, okay? And it was obvious from an early age that I would be following in my family's footsteps, and gladly so, that's who I am. And as a homeschooler, my family was able to allow me, to encourage me to focus on those subject areas that I was passionate about, that I had a gifting for. I would be concerned that if you had me take a standardized test or had some teacher from a public school assess my level in algebra, much less calculus, you might not be very impressed, okay? But on the flip side, I play 4 instruments and have studied 6 languages and have traveled the world. I have a master's degree in German. I own a business successfully in Manchester. Like, my homeschool education was a success for me. It might not have been a success for someone else who wanted to become an engineer, but it was a success for me. And every homeschool family is going to have different educational values and goals, different ways of achieving them. You can't have a system that then tries to assess whether this homeschool education is a success or a failure. It's impossible, so don't try. We've got this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking my testimony. I just have a couple of points. Thank you,
Can you
Representative.
put your name down?
Thank you. My name is Gretchen Post. I'm from Dublin. You can remind me of everything else I'm supposed to do. I just have 2 things that I think are not redundant. One, the lawyer from HSLDA did mention this, but his report is really long, and mine is only 3 pages, so you can find it on mine easier. So mine, I just wanted to make the point that I believe it was Representative Tucker who introduced this bill, and she did talk about the tragic reality of the opioid abuse problem in our state, which is a huge problem. We have a very good friend who is an EMT, and it's a real issue. And I'd like to say that this bill does not begin to address that issue. It's completely unrelated. Anybody who is in a drug abuse situation and claims to be homeschooling, and there's any evidence at all that they are not, there are sufficient laws already on the books that require that to be reported, and it ought to be reported, and it ought to be dealt with. Unfortunately, I've come to a realization last night when I was staying up late getting this ready. Sorry to be so naive, but I just was realizing kind of for the first time, because I am a law-abiding citizen, that laws do not make people obey the law. They only punish people who aren't. It was kind of an insight. So really, if we can just zoom out from all the, what we're really talking about is paperwork that people like me are going to fill out really diligently because I'm really good at jumping through the hoops. And I think probably the vast majority of all of us here are really good at following the rules. The people who are already breaking the law are not suddenly going to think, oh, there's a new law that says paperwork. I will now send that in. So that was my one point I wanted to make. And there, in my written testimony, it does refer to the RSA 193.1 and 189.36 and 169.D5, which are all laws that are currently in place, channels that are supposed to be being followed when there is neglect and abuse. And the other one is just, again, to just kind of zoom out of the philosophical issues that we're talking about and just say that what we're really talking about is reporting test scores and things at the end of the year. And really, and we report them to the school district, and then they file them, and that's pretty much what happens. To me, this law represents paperwork and very little else. I was here in Concord 6 years ago when this very similar bill was, oh, Representative Moffat, this answers your question, I think, when you talked about what was the issue when it came up before. So 6 years ago, we were trying to take out language that people are now trying to put back in. And it was successful 6 years ago. And I think that's because everybody was convinced, or at least the majority was clearly convinced, that it was nothing more than a bill about paperwork. It was unhelpful and unnecessary and accomplish nothing except to make us have to do more photocopying and give the superintendent something more to photocopy and file. And my little anecdote for this is, I'll try to be super short. Oh dear, I just was getting started. I thought I was gonna be so short, it doesn't often happen. I'll be really quick. So they lost the scores. So I sent the test scores in, and about 6 weeks later, one of my sons, we did get acknowledgement of them, but the other 2 older boys, there was no acknowledgement week after week after week. So finally, it was actually 6 months later, I finally called the superintendent's office, and then they did find them. And I guess what that speaks to is, as much as I actually really love our school district, I think they are awesome. I graduated from it myself, and I have no complaints. But all we are to the school district is a piece of paper. That's what my children are to them, that needs to be filed or not. But to us, they are our children, and we actually care about them. So I'll stop there. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Questions? Thank you. I'd like to have Catherine, Riley Glasser, and Jack Glasser. Followed by Dan Gable.
My name is Riley Glazer. I am 10 years old. I am from Derry, New Hampshire, and I am homeschooled. My favorite thing to learn about is history because I like to know what has happened before I was alive. I have enjoyed reading about Pearl Harbor, writing about Midway, and watching documentaries on Hiroshima and the Atlantic Wall. Traveling across the country visiting national parks like Yellowstone, Minuteman Missile, Stones River Battlefield, and Fort McHenry have taught me about preservation, the Cold War, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812. I like to think about what would happen if I went back in time and changed history, like if I killed Hitler, stopped Lincoln's assassination, or freed my great-great-granduncle from Anderson prisoner of war camp. I took a class in New Hampshire history at a co-op, a homeschool co-op called Mosaic Explorer. I went to a history talk about Camp Stark at my local library. I do not want HB 1263 because the school board does not understand how I learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you Riley or Jack?
Riley.
Thank you. Jack, you're up.
My name is Jack Glazer. I am 7 years old, and I am from Derry, New Hampshire, and I am homeschooled. My favorite parts of homeschooling are learning math by playing games, learning history by going to national parks, and learning to run a business by baking and selling cupcakes. I've also learned how to cook, sew, do demolition, take care of chickens, build a fort, extract honey, mow the lawn, and speak in public. HB 1263 will not make my education any better, and I do not want it to pass. But thanks for the service lesson.
Thank you, Jack. Welcome, Catherine.
I am Catherine Michelotti. I am 38 years old. I am from Derry, New Hampshire, and I am a very proud homeschooling mom of those 2 young gentlemen. I would like to answer a question that was asked earlier by the committee about the resources that are available to homeschoolers. I am the Granite State Home Educators representative on the Home Education Council, and we have 1,100 members just since our 13-month inception. There are 25 other groups that are available as resources for homeschoolers. For Granite State Home Educators, on our website and on our Facebook page, we have different resources. We have the laws for homeschooling, we have classes that are offered, field trips that are offered, testing and evaluation methods that are available to anyone who asks, and we also offer support, 100% support, whether someone is struggling with kids at home, whether someone is struggling with spelling, which we do. All these resources are available on our website and on our Facebook page. So there are plenty of resources out there, and they're really just either a click or a phone call away. As you have heard from my sons, we don't really do school at home. Our lifestyle is more akin to unschooling. I don't believe in grades, I don't believe in workbook pages, or 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. learning schedules. I believe in a life lived richly, filled with interesting people, real-world experiences, and exciting opportunities. Today we are studying civics. Albert Einstein has a quote that resonates with me and describes our homeschool. I never teach my pupils. I only provide the conditions in which they can learn. I have no desire to take the evaluation of my children's quality education and hand it over to a system that deals solely in quantitative measurements. Nor should I be required to. It is an invasion of my privacy. Edward Snowden said, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. When you say, I have nothing to hide, you're saying, I don't care about this right. You're saying, I don't have this right because I've just got to the point where I have to justify it. That's not the way rights work. The government has to justify its intrusion into your rights. The supporters of this bill have not justified this intrusion. My children are evaluated by a certified teacher as allowed in 193-A Section 6. This state-certified teacher interviews my children individually and extensively. She knows our homeschooling methods, understands my pedagogy, and treats my children as individuals. When she signs the evaluation, complete with her certification number, she is not only saying they have demonstrated educational progress at a level commensurate with their age and ability, but as a mandatory reporter, she is also certifying that no abuse or neglect is taking place. Allow me to emphasize this point. Any homeschooler who opts to have their children's portfolios evaluated are exposing their homeschool and their children to a person who is required by law to report any suspicion of abuse or neglect, educational or otherwise. That base is covered. I urge you to deem HB 1263 inexpedient to legislate on the grounds that any laws you pass will remove our right to keep the results of our evaluations private and will not prevent the abuse and neglect it is trying to find. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you, and I appreciate your referencing the certified teacher and the responsibilities of a certified teacher. I'd like to invite John Camuso. I hope you're up deck first, yes. But,
Dan Gable?
Yeah, Dan, you're first, then John.
I'm Dan Gable from Londonderry, New Hampshire. Been homeschooling since early 80s. I was part of writing the law for 193A, and as many were here. I have 7 children. We're just finishing up our 18-year-old right now, and we think we've done a pretty good job. There's 3 things I want to address here. One is lack of trust. The second is records retention and security. And the third is diagnostic versus punitive, and that goes into the portfolio issue. As you know, there's many things we can use to evaluate a child's progress, which is wonderful in this state. This state has one of the best homeschooling laws in the union. Because of that, and because of my work on the original writing of the law of 183A, we had our children tested out of state in Maine at a company that did homeschool testing and were certified so that we couldn't be attacked on that issue. But this generated a lot of portfolios. Can you imagine the file cabinets at this state level with portfolios? It would be overwhelming. Then you have to look at records retention and security. The IRS and the National Security Administration cannot even protect our records. I hold a security clearance, and they lost my records. Do you think that the education establishment in this state can secure your records? Where are those records going to go? How are they destroyed? How are they cataloged? When we first wrote this law, 193A, that was a point. We finally decided, the Department of Education decided, let's just put them in a basement in a file cabinet. And there they sat. lack of trust. 193A reaffirmed the parents' right and responsibility to educate their children. This came up when a school principal told me that at 6 years old, that child in my home was no longer mine. That child was theirs, and they would let him go to my home if they wanted to. That's why we wrote 193A. The second thing is the diagnostic, and I'll make this really quick. I grew up on a ranch in the desert of Arizona. The readers at that time were Dick and Jane. Dick and Jane was written in Connecticut. They have stone walls, they have trees that turn color in the fall, they have a babbling brook, and they have woods. All lies to a guy who lived in a desert. So I had a reading difficulty. My parents were interested enough in my education to figure out what was going on, but the school system wasn't. And they finally figured out if they got me some Cowboy Sam readers, I'd be fine. But the school insisted on Dick and Jane. That is lockstep education. That's the opposite of homeschooling. I oppose this bill. Give us the freedom to educate. We're doing a very good job.
Are there questions? Thank you very much. Welcome. And I want to apologize. There was one card that was stuck in the middle. It's Corinne Cascadden, Berlin Public Schools. Is she still here? Okay, why don't we let you go first, because I know you have a long drive all the way back to the North Country.
Yes, Berlin is north of the Notch. Honorable Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Corinne Cascadden, that superintendent of the Berlin Public Schools, and have been for the past 9 years, and a principal 23 years prior to that. I have been the resident reporting agency for families who elect to provide home education to their children if they so choose to communicate with me. Home education is a viable choice for students to receive an adequate education and is generally met with success. In our communities in the North Country, north of the Notch, we have relationships where we all live and work in those communities, and we don't discriminate or segregate parents and families who choose to do public school, private school, charter school, or homeschooling, because our children all interact. I'm here because I've had some very disturbing experiences with some families, and they certainly are not represented today. So I am the advocate for our kids in our communities. Since 2012, legislation stripped all oversight and monitoring of student accountability. RSA 193-A:5 provides a scapegoat for disengaged youth and families by allowing children to be unaccounted for. This opens the door for illegal, abusive, or neglectful situations. As legislators, I urge you to advocate for and ensure the right to an education for all children in our communities, because they cannot be the spokespersons. Without consistent accountability measures in place, we are currently jeopardizing education of all children, not just some. The City of Berlin has seen a 36% increase in the past 3 years in the number of students who withdrew from public schools to have a home education program. That reflects an increase from 33 students to 92 students. Colleagues in other parts of the states have expressed similar concerns. Reasons parents have expressed to me their interest to homeschool their child. Student grade 12 withdrew October 13th. These are all this year. Because she works late, wants to sleep in. Student grade 8 withdraws to assist with a family business. Student grade 11 withdraws in October, doesn't like 2 students in some of their classes. Student grade 7 withdrew December 7th. Parent says she's too interested in boys and wants to focus on her schoolwork. Student grade 10 withdrew due to poor attendance, earned 0 credits, enrolled charter academy, had to withdraw. Student grade 9 withdrew, complained of harassment, issues resolved, student returns. Grade 9, bear with me, I'm almost done. Grade 9 withdrew, parent wants to prevent her from getting in trouble on the streets. Student grade 1, letter of intent, August 30th, found living in a bedroom with animal feces and a German Shepherd leashed in the bedroom. Student grade 1, letter of intent, August 30th, illegal activities discovered in the home. Student grade 12 withdrew, January 2nd, wants to do online home education, 18 years old. Student grade 11, withdraw. January 2nd, wants to do online, wants a better job, 18 years old. Reasons to homeschool are generally not disclosed, nor do they need to be. I don't really care why people need to homeschool. But in our small communities in northern New Hampshire, we all have a relationship. And I'm confident that the cases cited here are not adequately being educated. I have no issues doing home visits when I need to on students who are enrolled in public schools. I have no authority, nor do I feel I should have authority to go check homes of parents who choose to send children to private school or homeschool. Based on current legislation, we have no assurance that students are safe, healthy, and receiving an adequate education. There's no mechanism to know if any students have moved away from the area, if there are students and families who do not report home education, if students are being held in captivity or in any unsafe, unhealthy environments. As a passionate educator, I am disheartened by the current situation and fear the lack of adequate protection for our students will breed dysfunctional adults in our communities because we educate our students in the communities to be able to sustain our current communities. So we all care about all each other. I encourage you to vote in favor of House Bill 1263. Approval of this House bill does not impact the families and students who provide successful and adequate home education because they are conscientious and accountable for their children. But we have many families in New Hampshire based on poverty who aren't accountable for their children. So I do have a written statement I'd like to submit, if I may.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. That material can be brought down and given to Representative Shaw.
Representative, I also have a written statement from Lisa Lavoie, the principal of North Country Charter Academy, who has sent also a written statement but was unable to be here.
Thank you.
Can I submit those?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Committee members, thank you. My name is John Camuso. I am here as a father of home-educated children. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully. I wanted to be careful not to bump the mic. And I am here in opposition to HB 1263. I think with the testimony that we just heard, if we go back and remember all the testimonies that we heard before, pretty much nullify everything that was just said because the accountability does exist. We did hear from quite a number of people that that by having your children assessed by a certified teacher, that certified teacher is required by law to report any neglect or any concerns. And so a big part of what was just mentioned is completely false. But that is really not the reason why I came to the microphone today. What I would really like to share with the committee members and with my fellow citizens of New Hampshire has a lot to do with Article 6 of the New Hampshire Constitution, if I may. As morality and piety, rightly grounded on high principles, will give the best and greatest security to government and will lay in hearts of men the strongest obligations to do subjugation. That is the beginning of that article of our Constitution. And I think as you've seen today, you've seen tremendous and wonderful example of good behavior of the young children that have been in this room. When I take my children to a restaurant, my wife and I have 9 children. Very frequently, the comment is made by the waitress or someone else, "Oh, your children are so well behaved." I know that other home educators experience the same thing. Also, it could be someone delivering packages to our house, and that the driver of the package van will say to me, "Are your children home educated?" And I'll say yes. He say, "Oh, they're so respectful." Another very common attribute that you'll see given to home-schooled children. Not something that you would typically get, sadly, from the product of the public schools. And I speak by experience because I am a product of the public schools. I was a public school student. But I'd like to continue on with this Article 6. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll skip on down to what I believe is the very last sentence, or the last 2 sentences. It says, But no person shall ever be compelled to pay towards the support of the schools of any sect or denomination, and every person, denomination, or sect shall be equally under the protection of the law, and no subordination of any one sect, denomination, or persuasion to another shall ever be established. And
You're at 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. And so I just submit to you that the spirit of the alterations represented in 1263 are contrary to the spirit of Article 6 of the Constitution of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite to the mic Valerie Ewell and Stephen Daves following that. Is Valerie still here?
I am.
And you're going to be sitting down in front?
Yes, thank you. Somewhere close. If I could just sit here.
You could sit right there and do it.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
Yes, hi, my name is Valerie Ewell from Milford, New Hampshire, and I am reading a testimony from my daughter who homeschools my 2 grandchildren. So I'm going to read it verbatim. She says, if I can get to the top of it, members of the House Education Committee, thank you for taking the time to hear the testimonies of so many of your constituents, either for or against the opposed bill, HB 1263. What a wonderful testament to the things that work in our great democracy. Everyone has the right and opportunity to make their voice heard. Many people take this for granted, but I feel blessed to have the freedom, especially in the great state of New Hampshire, the live free or die state. New Hampshire is a great place to be a homeschooler. There are just enough regulations in place to keep homeschool parents accountable for the education of their children, but not so many that we can't exercise our right to home educate in the way that works best for our children. We have the ability to tailor our children's education to their interests and abilities. This means that if our children struggle in an area of their academics, we can offer extra support and find a way to meet them where they are, so to say. It also means that they aren't so bogged down by requirements that there isn't enough time to pursue their greatest interests. I have 2 children that I homeschool. I home educate. Isaac is 11 years old and he is autistic.
Okay, yeah.
He is interested in computer programming and Greek mythology. He is learning Latin and has expressed an interest in also learning Greek. Our local school district doesn't offer Latin and programming until high school, and Greek not at all. Homeschool allows Isaac to dive into these interests and I'm sorry, I just lost my place. And let them take him as far as he wants to go. He also takes math and language arts, science and social studies, civics, art, and music. He is involved in the community as a teammate on the Special Olympics team and as a member of our church youth group. When Isaac was in public school, he was bullied. He couldn't learn efficiently because public schools are not built for kids like Isaac. We spent too many years fighting with the 504 teams to get him the assistance he needed, only to end up frustrated and heartbroken. When we started homeschooling after his 3rd grade year, it was like a whole new world had opened up to us. Isaac had all the help and individual attention he so desperately needed. He has 2 full years behind. He was a full 2 years behind in his academics. Homeschooling has given us the ability to meet him where he is and move forward. Isaac is now thriving. He has almost fully caught up to the grade level and has discovered a love of reading that has brought his reading comprehension skills to a sophomore level. I've enjoyed going on adventures with him to Cair Paravel in the magical land of Narnia and aboard the ship Hispaniola of Treasure Island. If not for homeschooling, I shudder where Isaac would be now.
We have gone beyond 3 minutes.
Oh, two more seconds?
Well, I prefer not
Okay.
to read anything. Try to summarize rather than reading. We've gone through 37 already, and we have another 26 still to go.
Okay. Well, school choice has allowed us as parents, advocates, and biggest fans to give him the education the public school system failed him. And we just want him to be able to soar and to be able to, he's the future.
I think we ought to put the mic back up right now, and we'll go on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Is it Miss Carson back there?
Stephen
I will
Diggs.
have you right after this speaker right here.
Right here. Thank you very much for listening to my testimony today. I want to thank you for coming. You can tell this issue is very important to a lot of people, especially by their showing and the almost unanimous testimonies that you've received, except for a few government officials. Basically, I was really disturbed of the concept that my homeschooling children would need to score a 40% on some arbitrary test that's probably decided by an official. And actually, I was looking at the law, and it doesn't even say who picks what standardized tests are available. It says any national standard achievement test is what's required, and then the provider of the test, or the publisher of the test, decides what the testing requirements are. So I've created a standardized test for children to take. It's a simple one-question test that I believe fits in with the law. I don't know if there's currently a requirement for what test is supposed to be offered. Can anybody help enlighten me on that? Because it's not really written into the law, specifically what national standard achievement test the students are supposed to take. But basically, it's really asinine to come to the concept that we can boil down the concept of learning into a test, and that you'll be able to find the outlying children who've been left behind, that hopefully their parents will decide to submit after not submitting all the other requirements that the lovely people here have outlined really well, showing that there are lots of safeguards in place to try to prevent neglect and abuse of homeschooling children. That seems to be the most common plea that I've heard. What about the children that fall through the cracks? I would like to please ask you to look over the laws that are already in place that do protect people and protect children from falling through the cracks, and to ask yourself if passing more laws that aren't already being followed will help children or help the parents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? You might talk to the superintendent there. I could talk to you about what a norm reference test or a national standardized test is, but it's reliable, it's valid, and it's done with an original norming group. And it's not one that a one question is going to do it.
I just wanted to go off what you were saying. That just wasn't defined in the House bill at all. So when you have bills with words in them that aren't defined, they're subject to interpretation by officials after the fact. And that's not really based on like the principle of passing a law that everyone understands and that is in plain English. So specifically, there is no definition in this bill for the National Student Achievement Test. It's a random phrase that's put together. So.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stacy Carlson. I have a written testimony, but we had a little water bottle accident this morning, so I will submit this. Hopefully it can be read. I'm Stacy Carlson. I homeschool my daughter in Stratford. I also am a leader of a homeschool support group called Seacoast Christian Home Educators Association. We have a Facebook group of almost 500 members from New Hampshire and some in southern Maine. Prior to homeschooling, I had many preconceived notions about it and have found that many in society still do. Our daughter was 5 when the 2012 law was implemented, allowing homeschool families to keep test results or evaluations private, but still requiring that we notify the intent to homeschool and perform tests or evaluations. So I've never had to submit test results to anyone. As with the hundreds of families I've met in New Hampshire in the last 7 years, our daughter is receiving a personalized, well-rounded, quality education at home. I've learned that different families and even various kids within those families receive highly varied forms of educational timeframes and focuses year to year depending on their needs. The proposed legislation requiring a 2-year period for parents to verify that their children are either above the 40th percentile or commensurate with age and ability is not a reasonable indicator of what the government deems a satisfactory education. For example, my daughter began showing reading skills at age 4, so I focused on developing that skill, and at kindergarten age started a formal reading curriculum. She began to be disinterested and overwhelmed. I backed off in first grade for the most part. In second grade, I started giving her books that were easy for her to build her confidence, and by mid-second grade, she began reading literally overnight. She is now in 5th grade and has a comprehension of late 9th grade level. people have said to me, well, you're one of the good ones. But you know what? The vast majority of us are the good ones. If I had been required to submit test results or even evaluations, she could have failed first and second grade composite scores, and even though she tested in the 99th percentile for math in second grade, as I didn't teach spelling until third grade, and it was a poor score as well. Trying to condense this, but I don't know if I can. This bill requiring documentation be sent to overseers to somehow prove that we're, one, teaching our kids, and two, in satisfactory manner and time frame that you deem appropriate, is akin to having all parents submit to state-funded counselors every year to be sure they're parenting their children well, stay in areas of being fed proper food, attention, going to bed, not being left home alone, not exposed to pornography, given alcohol, drugs. I mean, would you do that? Heck no. Sure, we all care about all our precious children, and my heart breaks when I hear children in less than adequate home situations, especially hearing from the Berlin School District. It's very sad. But we need to be very careful to not step on the slippery slope of government intervention. It's not wise to take a minuscule percentage of homeschool neglect cases and equate that to the need to legislate the masses of homeschoolers in our state, creating less freedoms, additional costs.
Excuse me, we've gone 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I would ask that if you have written testimony, please submit it and then summarize it, please. So it'll make it a lot more helpful for all here. Jessica Shapney.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting us come in and share what we want to share with you. So I have a license from the state of New Hampshire that tells me that I am qualified to teach special education in math and literacy. And so for the past few years, I've been working for the Mascoma School District, and as of this year, I resigned my position because even though I was an employee of the school district, I was able to see how they were failing each one of my 4 children in their educational plans. I had 4 kids in the school district, 2 who excel way beyond where they need to, 1 who is average, and 1 who falls below state guidelines for where they feel that she should be. 1 child has a 504 plan and an IEP, and teachers were failing to follow the guidelines of the 504 plan. She was becoming frustrated and agitated with school. I was finding myself arguing with her every morning, come on, it's time to go to school. And she'd cry and kick and scream, I don't want to go there, I feel bad. She was becoming so worked up and frustrated that she could make herself throw up at the thought of going to school because she wasn't feeling welcome, she wasn't feeling loved. She felt stupid, and those were her descriptive words for me. I don't want to go, they think I'm stupid, and I'm tired of feeling like that. An older child of mine didn't want to go to school anymore because she was bullied for her looks. She's a beautiful child. And again, she was made to feel inadequate because I would not let her wear some of the provocative clothing the girls her age were wearing. She was teased because I wouldn't let her go to school dances where she would come home and tell me about the things that were going on at school dances that I didn't want her being involved with at 12 years old. My son, he was bullied and made fun of, and at one point he was beat up, and when he fended himself off, he was the one that ended up in detention because the child that first initiated the fight has a hard life at home, and so we need to give him some leeway and understanding. I don't think that this bill would help any of the kids who have adequate homeschooling at home. This large umbrella bill that would envelop all of us who are doing fine wouldn't serve the purpose you're trying to reach with the children that are supposedly falling through the cracks. They need a different kind of intervention that this bill would not reach. Everybody's testimony here is amazing. Every parent here does a fabulous job with their children. And these children are probably going to exceed what the school district is capable of giving them. I think our school districts do okay for what they have to work with, but mediocre is not enough for most of our children. We want the best potential that they can reach. And causing us to have to turn in, these tests, they wouldn't show anything. I have a son who was capable of explaining to me on a ride here. He's 10 years old. He was able to explain the process of what it takes for a bill to become a law. using legal terms that I didn't understand until I was of voting age. He wouldn't have learned that in school this year. I'm not sure he would have learned it ever because it's not something I picked up in school. So I would hope that you rethink the law that you're trying to reach, because what you're going for isn't going to, it's not going to fix the problem you're trying to fix.
We're at 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Elijah Aubrey.
Good afternoon, representatives, chairman. Thank you for letting me speak. I just want to recognize your sacrifice for being here today and that you volunteer for this position at no pay practically. And just to let everyone know, they do this on a practically no salary whatsoever every day. So thank you very much for doing that. I just want to say that, tell you about myself. My name is Elijah Aubrey, and I am a constituent from Barrington and am a homeschooled student. Just a little bit about myself. I use a fully accredited program for the past 12 years of education. I've been an honor student since in 7th grade, and I will be attending the United States Naval Academy this June. And I was appointed there by Senator Maggie Hassan and our nation's president, and I desire to serve 20 years in the Marines and then return to New Hampshire. Representative Shaw, I do want to serve in this legislature as a representative when I get back from the Marines. So can't wait to join these halls one day. So personally, though, I do disagree with this bill. It confuses me on its intent. I feel I question the intent of it to truly take care of every single student, and if it's truly for the cause of the children and for their betterment. And I believe that it's more towards that the government doesn't have, right now our state government doesn't have direct control over the education system of the homeschoolers. So then this law provides a way for the government to inject itself into the homeschooling system and to have power and influence there. So today it may be this law, and we may have to send in records and do all this work and complicate the superintendent's office incredibly. But then tomorrow it's a mandatory book or a mandatory program. And then after that, it's no more homeschooling, or it's all of it has to be dealt with in between the governments. So that's what I'm here to say. I disagree with this bill, and I think it is government overreach into our personal lives and into my life as a future father. And I want to homeschool my kids. I believe it's overreach into my responsibility to educate my children how I deem, because I love them, and I will love my children, and I do truly care about them, and I believe that's my responsibility and not necessarily the responsibility of the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Melanie Johnson. Is Melanie here?
SB 1263 places irrational performance requirements on homeschooling families. Children have different goals and different abilities, which for many is the purpose of homeschool in the first place, so it makes sense that they will pursue different curriculums. It is not particularly sane to test someone for one curriculum when they are pursuing another, which is what standardized testing is. I'm a Melanie Johnson, Manchester resident. I have no intention of ever setting foot in a public school other than to vote in elections and promptly leave. I am an anarchist. I am considered an extremist even by other anarchists. I am a contributor at Free Keene and a weekly host on Free Talk Live. You can look up my writings and see my positions on topics such as proportionality and defensive force that are considered extreme even by members of my own community, to the extent that Ian Freeman has prohibited me from publishing them on Free Keene. The Free State Project began putting disclaimers on participant stories when they published mine. And there is pending legislation that would potentially force my children into your public schools, at which point I would attend every PTA meeting, teacher conference, field trip, and in general be present in the school as much as parents are allowed. And you would be legally required to let me. And in most cases, you would be legally required to let me speak. I don't want to be in your public school system. You don't want me there. And I am certain that most of your constituents who have children in public school do not want me there.
Thank you very much. Questions? Thank you. William Neighbors.
Hello, I'm William Neighbors, also of Manchester and fiance of Melanie. Before I get to the main body of my testimony, I would like to address the idea of that there are drugged out parents sitting there not educating their kids. Frankly, it's an absurd idea because these parents who don't care about their children are going to send them to the public schools because it's easier for them. It's more free time to have without them. Like, it's just the easiest option for them. Obviously, that's what they're going to do. And certainly my experiences within public education were quite horrible. It is no secret that the U.S. schools are complete and utter failures. But why is this? Quite simply, it's because public schools are inherently socialist. That is to say,
excuse me, can you please address the bill?
Yes, I'm getting to that. I'm setting up a premise. That is to say that they get their funding from theft, taxes, and bureaucracy. This creates a system of perverse incentives, including, but not limited to, beholdment to bureaucracy and politicians. Power, of course, corrupts invariably, meaning that politicians are inherently corrupt. Therefore, the education system is inherently beholden
Would
to
you
the most
please
corrupt...
address the bill?
I am. This perverse incentive structure has allowed the Prussian model of education to crawl forth from the lowest bowels of hell. This system, adopted in the U.S. in the early 1900s, is one that is designed to stress obedience to false authority and to break the human spirit in critical thinking. It was a system designed to create a population useful to politicians, soldiers, and workers who knew enough to follow orders, but were unable to question those orders. Now, like with all socialist systems, this system is devouring itself. It is of the utmost of foolishness and unbridled authoritarianism to give those who have completely and utterly failed to to properly educate children and power over people who actually care about the education of their children. This education is an individualized thing, making it putting it into this public indoctrination system, standardizing it, destroys education. The standardization in this way is simply a matter of control and power and creating quote-unquote citizens who are useful to politicians.
Thank you very much.
This is pure protectionism for
Your
a vile,
3 minutes is
decrepit,
up.
and broken system. Anyone in favor of this is a pure authoritarian and is clearly unfit to be a part of society. Thank you.
I'd like to call Elizabeth Adams.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name's Elizabeth Adams, and I'm from Pittsfield, and I'm urging you to vote against HB 1263. I educated all 6 of my kids over a period of 19 consecutive years, and we stood here in the 1990s battling the same concerns and questions you have today, and I can assure you that our successful results pertaining to our children's education can testify for themselves. In the 1990s, I could understand your skepticism regarding the oversight, as homeschooling was believed to be a new concept. But now, in 2018, the unfounded concerns pertaining to an age-old method of education have undeniably successful results across the board. We began home educating our children in 1992, submitting to the same unnecessary regulations that are proposed by this bill. Every year we were told not to choose the testing option by the school because it would skewer the results of the overall numbers of the public school children in our district, as our children were way advanced in their studies. The professionals who evaluated our children complain to me every year about what a waste of their valuable time and resources this end-of-year duty was to them. Your concern that there would be a few students that might fall through the cracks led me to later on become an elected member of the school board. And I can assure you that there are many more cracks in that system than in the home-educated community. All of our children were taught at home a strong foundation of service to our nation, community, to God and each other. They learned local government by example. My service to the school board, their father's service as a two-term state representative, town moderator, budget committee chairman, and many other elected and non-elected duties to the town and state. To address the honorable representative, who I don't see anymore, who wondered what happened after we put in our intent to educate. Well, mine are all gone from the school system, but this is the end results. 3 of our children are now serving in the United States Air Force as officers, intelligence, special operations, personnel, and ICBM. The awards include the Bronze Star and Combat Controller of the Year. One just graduated with a BS in business, and the other is a registered nurse serving in our communities. And the last graduates this year in May as an American Sign Language interpreter, licensed, serving the deaf community. All have worked with diligence, earning many academic and leadership scholarships, thereby having their efforts rewarded by carrying no college debt. Now they're choosing homeschooling and private schooling and charter schooling for their own children. All this testimony regarding my own family begs the question, who gets to set the standards for education? It's not wise to set a plumb line against what results you don't want.
You're at 3 minutes.
Please vote against HB 1263. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question. Are you willing to take a question?
Yes.
Representative Sullivan.
Sure. I'm not sure that that would change anything. I mean, they have to register right now first time, right? That's my understanding. I haven't homeschooled for 8 years now. So that's kind of how I would look at it. But what would happen if a sex offender didn't register? The laws are on the books, correct? Okay.
Thank you. Angela Fitzgibbons. Is there an individual out here, Grenier, other than the rep? I don't think it's here.
Yes, hello. Thank you. James Grenier. No relation to the rep, thank you. I don't have a lot to add. I am an educator. I have a master's degree in education. I have published in the field of assessment. I don't work at the K through 12 level. I work at the college level. I teach university level courses. I mention that because one of the things when we talk about assessment, and I've heard the word accountability used quite a bit, which is, making sure people are doing the right thing, so to speak. But assessment is a separate thing, which is how do we know the learner learned what they're supposed to learn? Now, I think we've all gotten an education here today on all sides. I will say that, just to update a little bit of your information, earlier someone mentioned the number of students that are not prepared for reading, math, or writing when they come to us at the college level, and actually the number is 63% nationally. So, there's challenges everywhere. I love my public school students that come to me, and I love my homeschool students. The only thing I can really add to that beyond this is that there are areas in public school that we need to add to, and I'm not sure the bill even addresses that. So, for example, we talk about strengths, and I'm not an attorney, but when I was reading the language, it said they have to be able to demonstrate that they're at the certain grade level. My student, and I hate to personalize it, my youngest hates to read and write, no interest, but she's, according to when I look at the standards, about 3 grades higher in math. She actually works with simulations that, not to brag, uses simulations that were designed at the college level. I guess what I'm getting at is that education is a holistic thing. We're all learning every time as we go. And I think we've learned a lot from that. By the way, I've had a few friends ask me to consider running for rep, and after today's experience and seeing what you all go through, I think I have learned that maybe I won't do that. But my 12-year-old is very excited about the possibility of doing that at some point. So thank you both. Thank you all.
Thank you for coming. Michael Harris? Okay. Don Platt?
Hi, my name is Dawn Platt. I'm from Salisbury, New Hampshire. I have 7 children. Their ages 15 to 35. We have been homeschooling in New Hampshire for the past 27 years. So we've been through the different iterations of the law for homeschoolers. And the one thing I would like to say about this, going back to what was the law previously, is I don't see that it will actually help the education of these homeschool children in any way. When it was law that you had to do these evaluations and have them turn them in, the conversation among homeschool communities at the time was, it was mothers all concerned about, did we do enough? Do we have enough pages? Did we write enough stories? They didn't talk about what their children had learned. They didn't talk about what their children had experienced or who their children were. It was all about those papers that needed to be done to satisfy the evaluation in case, when it was turned in to their school district, their private school, or whoever it was, that there would be enough in that to satisfy them. But it didn't really look at what was the best thing for the child. What we knew when we turned in our evaluations to the school was they put them in a file and they never looked at them, and they made it very clear that that's what they did. So I don't see this as actually enhancing those children's lives at all.
Thank you very much. Sabrina and Leanna Hunter, are they here?
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm from Amherst, New Hampshire. We are new to homeschooling as of December. I tried public school, charter school, and private school for my daughter. She is visually impaired. By looking at her, you think, oh, she just wears glasses. But you don't know the underlying cause of things that she might have trouble with academically. She is very intelligent, so she does not qualify for any services in school, which makes it very challenging for her. She was bullied in school for her challenges. Sorry, I'm very nervous. We weren't aware of very many homeschooling options. I wasn't sure if I could homeschool her. Sorry, I'm very nervous. Anyways, if this bill passes, it would make it very hard for her in the public school system because we don't know what her academics will look like going forward. She has pathologic myopia, which can lead to blindness. So we're forever balancing with her eyes, which then can disrupt her academics. So it's basically taking 1 year at a time. It could mean next year she's falling behind. It could mean the following year she's way above. So if she were to have to go back into public school, she would fail, and there wouldn't be any services to help her because academically she's brilliant. She's not good on paper. She is very good at spelling and math, but she can tell it to you. She has a hard time doing it on paper. She's a very good writer, but has trouble writing, and it all surrounds her vision. Leanna, is there something that you want to say? Do you want to read it?
Hi, my name is Liana. Homeschooling is important to me because I learn better. I get more help with my schoolwork and more breaks for my eyes. I don't get bullied anymore. I oppose this bill.
Thank you very much. I have a son who lives in Romania. His wife's name's Sabrina, and their
really?
daughter is Elena.
No way. That's
Yep.
very awesome. Thank you.
I'd like to call James Davis, please. Here. Okay. Stephen Hampton.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for allowing me to testify today. When I open my mouth, you can tell that I, like Dr. Cascaden here, are not originally from New Hampshire. She's from Massachusetts. I'm from a little further south. However, I've lived here permanently for over 4 years, and I'm proud to call New Hampshire home. My wife and I spent a combined 11 years teaching in 5 different government school systems. Later, we taught for a combined 5 years at 2 different private school systems for a combined total of 10 different grade levels and almost every subject covered in elementary and high school. So when my wife and I chose to homeschool and chose homeschooling as a method to educate our children, we were not making that choice blindly. In the fall of 2013, my wife and I were looking at possible places to live. We wanted to move out of Western North Carolina as it had become economically a depressed region, and largely in part because of an abundance of government overregulation, like this today, that interfered with small economic development. So when we were looking for a place to possibly move to, New Hampshire looked really nice for a homeschooling family because of the legislation that you had passed in 2012, removing a lot of the bureaucracy that was involved in the homeschool process. In contrast, North Carolina would have burdened us with a bunch of bureaucratic requirements, even though we were both at the time certified instructors. We could go into a classroom and teach 30 children, but to homeschool our own child was going to be a very large burden for us to keep up with the paperwork. And I hear a lot of the parents here today saying stuff about, well, you know, extra paperwork, the burden. And this is a reality. And this comes out in conversations that my wife has with friends and acquaintances of hers that are members of the homeschooling community here in New Hampshire and then in North Carolina and in Georgia. The conversations they have here in New Hampshire for the past 3 years have been about curriculum, meetups, field trips, how do we, educational related topics, how do we educate better? In North Carolina, the friends and acquaintances in North Carolina and Georgia, where the homeschool burden is much more bureaucratic, those conversations center around the bureaucracy. It's not about how do I better educate my child, it's how do I meet this requirement? Am I going to be doing enough of this paperwork? Am I going to be providing enough work in my portfolio? And I think that if you look at, I could quote all kinds of statistics from lots of different sources, but I think we can pretty much agree that homeschool students perform in about the top 80 percentile on average in any educational instrument you use to measure homeschool performance across the board. And homeschooling for children that have special needs, either because they need more support, such as an autistic child, or
You're at 3 minutes.
Okay, one more second.
Yep.
Or a kid that needs to excel. They're not really going to get that at the public school, and I just I give written testimony, and I would ask that you please read the rest of it and that you oppose House Bill 1263. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard Kahn. Richard? Matthew Plack?
Thank
Finally.
you to all of you for staying so long and listening to all of us. My name is Matthew Platch. I live in Wolfboro. I'm a homeschool dad. I have 3 homeschool children, age 14, 16, and 18. The 18-year-old is a graduate of high school. I'm also an attorney. As an attorney, when I look at this legislation, which I would call do-gooder legislation, I ask, what good does this do for the target group? In this case, homeschoolers, homeschool families. Does it support us? Does it energize us? Does it make us better able to do our job? Does it honor us? The answer to all those questions is no. This bill is conceived in a pejorative understanding of a pejorative view of homeschooling. It's rooted in distrust. It seeks to put us all under a microscope and find the bad eggs so we can fix that problem. And that problem's really quite small. This legislation is really against the national trend, which is to make it easier to homeschool. And you'll see the map that, if you look at the map that Mr. Donnelly submitted, it compares the different states. New Hampshire right now is kind of in the middle of the road. We have a lot of state oversight, a lot more than a lot of other states, less than states like New York. I don't really want to live in a state like New York. I like living here under this regimen, and I think it works. So I hope you'll vote ITL on this legislation.
Thank you very much. We're definitely not New York. Nor do we want to be. Maria Chamberlain?
Hi, and thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Maria Chamberlain. I have been homeschooling since 1991. I have 7 children, ages 32 down to 10, which is God's sense of humor. So I still have at least 8 more years ahead of me, a while. So since I've homeschooled for such a long time, I've been to many hearings, rules committee meetings, and Board of Education meetings over the last 2.5 decades. The law that passed in 2012 was a favorable one for all who were previously involved in the assessment process. There was such a discrepancy among the superintendents about how to handle the evaluations, and many confessed that they never even looked at the results. They didn't know what to do. You heard some of the moms say that they had a portfolio like this, and you heard about the file cabinets. And a lot of them were never even looked at, or they didn't have the time. It comes in the summer. And so it just seemed like it was a burden to the public school system, and it was a burden to the homeschoolers. And then that was really never more clear to me than on 2 separate incidents, I was mailed 2 different homeschool families letter of intents. Like somehow things crossed, and their filing paperwork went to my address instead of my confirmation that I had notified the school. And that was pretty illustrative of the mismanagement of homeschool students' information. And so I would go and personally hand deliver back these random people's letter of intents, and they didn't know why it got mailed to me. And then, as somebody else said, they would wait till October until their intent was acknowledged. That happened to me all the time. So I think the law passed was a very good one. Also, I am the area representative for Classical Conversations, which is a homeschool support program where families meet weekly. Currently, I oversee the communities in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, which is about 950 students. So if you're worried about accountability, I can assure you that many families take advantage of the resources that are available to them. And also, we do offer standardized testing. We have in-house that we provide, and also online testing. So I don't have the numbers at my fingertips this minute, but I could give you, maybe a rough idea of some of the people who elect to use our Stanford 10. And also we provide the CTP4, which is the Comprehensive Testing Program, which is a very rigorous battery for high-achieving students, and that includes reading, math, listening, vocabulary, writing, and science, and that test is available online. I feel that for those who choose to do testing, it's nice to do in-person testing so that when they go to do SAT testing or ACT later, it's just easier for them. But anyway, if the concern is evaluations, rest assured that, like these moms testified, they want to know how they're doing, and they do abide by the law, and they do go and get evaluated by a certified teacher, or they do standardized tests, or like the gentleman who went to Calvert, they provide a transcript service, and so that's
we're at 3 minutes.
So so that's it. Do you have any questions?
Yes, Representative Wolf.
Thank you for taking my question. Do you have any idea how many homeschool students are in your school district area?
In SAU 44, I'm from Stratford.
What I'm actually looking for is how many homeschool students your superintendent would need to supervise or evaluate.
I don't have that current data, especially since 2012, you just have to notify once until you withdraw. So I don't have that, but it's in the thousands that homeschool in New Hampshire. So.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Thank you very much. I'd like to call Stephanie Motika.
Hello.
Welcome.
My name is Stephanie Motika, and on behalf of myself and my husband, who could not be here today, I oppose HB 1263. Our family's decision to homeschool was a personal choice, a choice that came with sacrifices, and a choice that we did not make lightly. We understood when we set out to this journey that it would require an unwavering commitment to raising our son to be an independent, free-thinking individual. The public school system's one-size-fits-all is an outdated educational model in the modern world. Every individual child has their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to how they learn best. As his parent, I have the ability to empower his strengths and build up his weaknesses. Nobody knows better how to raise our son than we do. We are giving our son learning opportunities that neither my husband nor I received from our public school education. We visit museums and participate in lessons within our homeschool groups on a weekly basis. We spend as much time as we choose on particular topics that excite him. He interacts with other children and adults of varying ages rather than simply being segregated by age. I constantly seek out opportunities to make our trips, running errands, running a household, cooking meals, and so many other activities into valuable learning experiences. No test or evaluation could ever accurately assess his skills or life experiences. This bill is invasive. Every family has the right to make their own choices regarding their children's education without being assumed guilty of neglect. It is ludicrous to suggest that my homeschool child be held to a higher standard than his public school peers. It is terrifying to suggest if the state determines he has not memorized enough bullet point knowledge that I am suddenly unfit to raise my child. This is a tremendous violation of my rights as a parent and a massive overreach of government authority. Many claim they want to attract young families to New Hampshire. My young family is a prime example of this claim. Our family moved to New Hampshire in 2016, and we immediately fell in love with our new home. A major factor in that decision was the passage of 2012's HB 1571, repealing these ridiculous and invasive requirements from law. We left Connecticut because we sought the freedom to live our life as we see fit. I suggest that if you truly want to attract young families to New Hampshire and keep them in this state, that you continue to expand the freedoms for us to make our own decisions, that you allow for more choice when it comes to educating our children. HB 1263 is a huge step in the wrong direction, and I request that you reject it as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Michelle Visser? Not here. Robin Reynolds? Is Robin here? Grace Legage? Jay Laura? Jay, is Jay here?
Am I the last one? I could speak for like an hour now?
You're second to the last.
So I only get 3 minutes, okay.
You did not win the lottery.
Well, thank you for staying. As a physician, before I order any test, I ask myself, is this test going to change the treatment or outcome for my patient? If it doesn't, I won't do the test. I won't expose the patient to unnecessary cost, inconvenience, or possible radiation. I believe this bill to be that unnecessary test. It won't change any outcomes. It won't stop neglect or abuse. All it would do is add cost and inconvenience and expose everyone to radiation. Like was already presented, more regulations don't stop neglect or abuse. The reasons the superintendent gave earlier didn't sound like children falling through the cracks. It sounded like families looking for a better education and finding it online, or looking for an environment where their children could learn without being harassed. The drug epidemic was also mentioned earlier as a problem, but the only way to stop this epidemic is to reestablish a family unit, one that is not separated 8 hours a day by sending your children to public school. I was from New York. I escaped the nanny state. We come to the live free or die state, a slogan which my 8 children invoke at bedtime. But I love this state, and I would love to stay in this state. And it was the burden of the New York State regulations on homeschoolers that drove us away from there. Hopefully, I wouldn't have to leave New Hampshire and I can raise my children here and retire here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Thank you very much. Edward Cross.
Hi, my name is Ed Cross. Thank you for your time here today. It's been long. I haven't been here the whole time, but my family has. So one thing that I wanted to speak about specifically are the reasons why some of us, or many of us, actually want to homeschool. You know, we strive to train up our children in the way that we think is best for them, from an educational standpoint and also from a Christian worldview standpoint. It's impossible for us to participate in the public school system with a completely opposite worldview look on how to teach our children. That's what we believe strongly in. The content of what is taught in public schools and how it's taught, you know, we have, and many of us have, disagreements with. Parental liberties seem to be disappearing on a regular basis. Our rights seem to be taken away as time goes on. We feel strongly of educating our children to the best of their abilities so that they can be successful in life. We have 7 children, my wife and I, 3 of which are older adults, well educated and very successful in their paths of life that they have now. We have 3 young ones still here that we are trained up, who actually visited this facility, this room, just over a month ago, and one of my daughters was very, very impressed with that red no button. So we are going to ask that you press the red no button. There was a question about hybrid education from the representative here in the front, and to my understanding, it is specifically a school district decision of whether they will let or allow your child to participate in 1, 2, half class, whatever. Some have an answer of no, some might be more favorable to it, but that, from what I understand, is by district, not by state. So that was just to answer your question there. Some of us may not have that ability, some of us might. Systems, as far as we're concerned with educating children, don't work. Individual education per child is what we strive to do and we find the most successful in our family, and that has a large reason why we choose to do that at a homeschool level. I guess one of the big questions would be, why should we be subjected to a system that we don't agree with and have to participate in it from either an educational standpoint or a religious viewpoint? One member here, one parent here stated to, give us this right, and I'm asking you not to give it. I'm asking you, don't take it away. And I think that our rights are always in subject to being fought against and fought for. I'm simply asking you to not take it away. We sacrifice much as homeschoolers. We sacrifice financially, because in order for us to educate, it's generally a one-income household, and we sacrifice a lot for the well-being of our family and for our children.
We're at 3 minutes.
And one thing I would really, really strive and stress on is please keep the liberty of this, the motto of this state of live free or die. We love that. We are in New Hampshire for a reason. We want to stay here. And yes, if you vote yes to this, this could be one more step towards New York.
Okay, we did receive just now one more card. Jennifer Doherty.
Hi. I am not related to Representative Doherty over there, though I am related to a different representative, but I'm not going to tell you who. I first wanted to say I do homeschool, but I was also a public school educator for 10 years. And I hear a lot, especially today, about how educators, they just want to move the kids to the next grade, and they don't really care about a differentiated instruction. And I have to say that majority-wise, that is not true. Most teachers really care about their students. Most teachers would love to be able to give individualized lessons to their students. To say that a superintendent doesn't care about students, I cannot agree with that. However, I do have to say that the district that I taught in for the longest time, I visited homes of children who there were people in the homes strung out on drugs. So the one thing that I could agree with the man from Manchester that he said is those parents will send their kids to public school because they want the free meal and they want the child out of the house. But where was the safe environment, or where was the safe haven for the children who had cigarette burns on their bellies, where nothing was done about it, or who were passed over again and again to the next grade, even though they were struggling, because that's what you did. No matter how many times we fought as teachers to get a child to be retained, we were told no, they had to move on. I will not send my children to public school. I will homeschool my children, and almost every teacher that I speak with has said to me, I wish I could do that. If I could, I would homeschool my child in a second. I do not want my children in public school, and these are public school teachers. I oppose this bill, but I do have to say I greatly appreciate the work of all public school teachers, of superintendents, because they really do care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no more pink cards up here, so with that, I'm going to close this hearing. Thank you.